inviting me, to all the faculty. It's a pleasure to be with your students again. I've seen their work, and I think they are very hardworking and very talented students that you have got there. So it's all my pleasure to be here. I will try and cover as much as I can in the 45-minute or 1 hour, whatever the session length is. But definitely this is a topic which is, as you know, it requires a lot of study to understand, and it's very hard to cover in such a short time, but I'll try and do my best. So as everyone got to know, my name is Pallavi, and today I will be talking to you about the psychology of space, but also I've given it a little bit of a twist. As Vidhu said, I did my PhD in architectural storytelling, so I will start with a question and a story for you, and then we will get into more details. Okay, I'll take a second to share my screen. So can everyone see my screen now? Yep, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to start today with a question. It may be simple. I think it's not so simple a question. So let me start with the question. Okay, how do I go forth in this? Okay, I'm using a computer that I normally don't use. I'll try and see how that, okay, maybe I just move it like that. So my question to you is architecture, interior design a noun, a verb, or an adjective? If there are someone in the audience who would like to answer, and it's probably it is a trick question I'm asking you. So think about it and tell me, is it a noun, a verb, or an adjective, or all, or none? Anyone? I know it's early morning for everybody. I hope you had your tea. No one in the audience?
They are. Some of the students, faculties, and researchers have joined through YouTube link as well.
I see. Okay. Okay. Maybe Ankit, do you want to give me something here? What do you think? Is design a noun or a verb or an adjective?
Design. I feel it like an adjective.
It's an adjective, Vidhu?
I think it's also a noun and it's also a verb. I think it's in making, but it's also the centerpiece of attraction. So I think I'll give them 2, but not adjective.
Okay. And Deepika?
I think mostly it's a noun because that's how we use it most of the time. Adjective sometimes, mostly I think it's a noun.
Okay, thank you. It is a trick question. I'll come back to it at the end of my presentation, okay? So the other thing that I'm going to start with is, I don't know if all of you know about Mullah Nasruddin and his stories. And there is this nice story that I read. It's called The Architect's Last Palace. And it talks about a king. Mullah Nasruddin is in the kingdom of the king, and the king's architect has grown very old and he's about to retire. So the king asks him, can you design a last palace, the last of your career, and try and make it the best palace that you can? So the architect heaves a sigh and says, okay, I'll do this last job that you're giving to me. And so he goes about designing it. The architect's work had been good so far. So the king is expecting a really nice palace. At the end of it, when he starts designing, he starts to feel lazy, and he says he doesn't do as much research. He doesn't really put in the things that are needed to make a palace beautiful, comfortable, psychologically pleasing. And ultimately he finishes it somehow, because he says, anyways, I don't have to design after this. So whether it's good or bad, it doesn't really matter. And ultimately he does the design, finishes it off, and goes to the king and says, well, this is the design, I've got it made and constructed, and here you go. Now I'm ready to retire. And then the king looks at the palace and says, oh, that's really good. And I hope you will like this gift, because this palace that you've made is a gift from me to you. So that he designs a palace for himself, but not with the same meticulous effort that he would have done if he would have known that this palace was actually intended to be for him. So why I like that story is, when we think of designing, especially, if you design your own house, how do you design? You think of every nitty-gritty, you think about the details, how can you make it appealing? But when we start designing for others, that should be the intent, but it's often lost. And here the psychology plays a big role. How do we make people feel comfortable? How do we give them emotional, psychosomatic well-being, both of the mind and the body, as designers? And the whole, I was working with Doshi when I was doing my research, and he told me that everything that you design should be like you're designing your last piece, and it should be a masterpiece. And it should be designed with utmost care for everything. How do I feel happy in it? How does my health thrive in it? How do my interpersonal relationships thrive in it? My productivity, how does that increase? All that should go into making any interior space. And that is because interiors have a lot of potency. Each element that you put into design, you learn about elements and principles, you learn about color, you learn about other things that go into making an interior. And you always think how each of those really impact the person who's living inside. And especially for us human beings, who most of the times we are indoors, correct? We are transitioning between work, we are transitioning to go to a shopping mall, we are transitioning, but most of our 90% of our times is really spent indoors. And we do have to work on the psychological effect that space has. And here I would like to bring up the idea in this book called The Poetics of Space by Gaston Bachelard. And it's a French author. It's a French book, but it's an English translation that I have read. And Bachelard is really talking about this concept of topo analysis, which he defines as this systematic psychological studying of the sites of our intimate lives. So what we call a home, and home not only where we live, but where we feel at home, is what he's trying to talk about. And he says the house is really the most intimate of all spaces. And hence the understanding of the house is, for Bachelard, a way to understand the soul, the psychology, the mind of people. And Bachelard sees the house as a sort of initial universe. It's really something that surrounds us, and he asserts that all inhabited space bears the essence of the notion of home, meaning that as soon as we feel comfortable, this idea of a home, whether it be a corporate space, whether it be a commercial space or a residential space, asserts itself. So on that note, I would like to differentiate between the two words, and of course, many authors have written about it, the idea of spaces versus the idea of a place. A space is more of a geometric construct where you have measurements of a space, but a place is where you feel at home. You remember, say, if you're many of us, when we were children, we used to go to our grandparents' place, and that's it's got a special place in our hearts. Why? why does it have? It's because the kind of interactions that we had there, how that home started to feel special. It felt like home, and that becomes a place. Whereas if you go and visit an empty house that you're probably going to buy, that is a space that you're looking at. But there are so many things that go into making a place. So what I'm going to do today is, it's very hard for me to talk about psychology, but I'll try and bring out some items in space that contribute towards this placemaking, this idea of a home, a psychological refuge, where you can go in and feel at home. So I wanted to bring out certain aspects that I feel a space can cater to. So a space is not only an aesthetic manipulation of a geometric space. There's so much going on when you design a space. You're thinking about what program is going to go in. So you're looking at, say, okay, there is an incentive by the government where they're trying to give space to people who are homeless. For example, that's a big thing in Canada. So it's a political thrust that is coming into making that space. Or it may be a cultural space. So, where people of a certain culture come in and they're trying to build that space. An artistic space. It can be because of that space exists because of a social reason, an economical reason, a religious, philosophical reason, or a technological reason. Because now, say, we have co-working spaces where each corporate office doesn't really own space. Here, what's happening because of COVID, in downtown Ottawa, we had a lot of government buildings. Now with COVID, everybody's working from home, and now they are looking at transforming those spaces that are vacant into housing to fulfill the shortage of housing in here. So there could be technological reasons behind which a space, why a space is designed. And we as our architects, as interior designers, we have a lot of agency, a lot of power. And if we do responsible design, and if we foster what is called critical thinking, why are we doing what we are doing? How does it impact people? What kind of a psychology does it create? Does it create an inclusive environment? Does it create something where everybody feels safe? Women feel safe. People in minority groups feel safe? Does it give a space where you can nurture talents and so on? Those are critical questions that we need to ask. Those are psychological factors. How do we make women feel safe? An interior space can provide certain answers. So that's where the potency of interior design lies. And it increases the understanding of the meaning of objects within their own time and across time. So why is it happening? How we can do better? Those are things that we should always question ourselves. So let's look at some of the tools that we have in our box as interior designers. And here I would start with elements of design. And one second, I'm going to move this box somewhere else because I'm not sure if it's blocking my screen. So I'm going to talk to you about some elements, and I'm not sure if you're in second year, third year, fourth year, but everyone must have. So I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but the elements of design are line, color, texture, size, space, shape, value. And all of these in some way or the other affect how we psychologically perceive space. So if you look here, there are clear lines in here. So if you can see, there are lines in the railing, there are lines that are there on the steps. There are horizontal lines, vertical lines. There are certain curved lines that you can see. And each of these help us perceive something or not. So for example, the first thing that really stands out to us is probably the steps and these column-like planters that are on the side of the steps. And these lines help us feel, they give a character to the space. They also help or they make us feel a certain way. There is a formality that is probably expressed here when you look at the lines. When there are more curved lines, they talk about more sensual space, a space which is probably catering to other facilities, like maybe entertainment. Not this one probably seems more like a commercial corporate space, whereas others could be theatrical spaces and so on. So even by looking at the aesthetics, the kind of lines that we are using, it starts to imbue a certain property on how we perceive the space. Similarly, if you go to shapes, there are different shapes that define our spaces, and they act in different ways. So for example, when you look at, say, lines on the ceiling, many times they also psychologically tell you which way am I supposed to go. They help you to do wayfinding. So many times, you can design a space using lines on the ceiling or on the floor and direct or give direction to the traffic that is inside your space. So psychologically, people are induced to think that you have to move in that direction. And there are different ways of doing it, but it could be through signage, but even through interior design in terms of like subtle elements, you can still use those in a way that it could direct how people behave in space. Many a times, we might have a space where you don't want people to loiter in those spaces for a long time. So the kind of lines that are used in there may be deliberately uncomfortable so that people do not feel too relaxed and they start to move around, move away from that space after a little while, giving way to others to come in. Similarly, form really is, if you look here, this is at the Toronto Pearson Airport, and this space, if you look, is the void, the what is called form, and the now I'm blanking out, but the void in between the form, and that in itself is more prominent than the form itself. So you see the circular space in between rather than the form of the enclosures. So depending on how you play with form, you can make a space feel big, small, enclosing. It could be, again, you feel that you can go through the space. So a lot of the psychology of the inhabitants are affected by how the forms, the lines play with each other. So if you look, I put in a photograph here. It's the Wellington General Post Office, and these are the public counters. If you see, and we are very familiar with this cubicles, these cubicles that have come down through from modernity, right, in the early 1900s, where the idea of office started to take place. And here, if you see, there are different kinds of lines. There's these vertical lines that start to make the rows of the space. And then there are these horizontal lines that divide the workers who are working in that space. Now, very interesting to note here is this particular configuration made people work in a certain way in that office. It's not like the open office that we are used to, where you can look around, talk to your people, to the people around. There's collaboration happening. This was a more top-down hierarchical office setup where people are sitting within their cubicles. They have to complete a certain amount of work that has been passed down to them from their superiors, and the time that they are in the office, they're supposed to sit in that cubicle and really or concentrate on what they're doing inside. So the work is paramount, and what happens is it's a very kind of bureaucratic corporate structure where profit making and may not be in this particular example, but in general, in those kinds of cubicle office, where each hour that a person spends there, they have to have maximum efficiency. They're not supposed to look around and waste time. So the interior design elements really forced that to happen. It wasn't that someone was standing there and telling them that you do not need to get up. It's the interior design elements that force that kind of psychological behavior from people. And again, you all know how we are going through the pandemic and how, again, the design of spaces has started to undergo changes with, the physical distancing that we have to maintain, how we need not be close to each other when we are working. So even if you look in this picture that I've put in from the New Yorker, and how the coronavirus will reshape architecture, this whole idea of how lines would be, what are the minimum distances between different people sitting, how are they facing? See, if you look at them, they're all facing alternatively. So this one, if you can see my cursor, one of them looks one way, the person next to them looks the other way, and so on. And there is that barricade, again, the use of line, shape, form to separate people because of health reasons. And similarly, in the other picture, if you see the idea of where you can move the directions on the ground, so that those are marked in interior spaces, so that now people are just following that whole idea of a social life is really being recalibrated, rethought of through design. It's not that anybody, of course, we are being told to keep safe and distant from each other, but still it's the design of interior spaces that is really making that happen. Again, color. Color is another, light and color, I think they go hand in hand, because, I always, when I teach color theory or light, I always say these are aspects that really change, and what the color or the material that you're looking at changes depending on what light you're looking in. If you're looking at it in bright sunlight, it looks different. If it's an incandescent bulb, it looks different. If it's an LED, it looks different. So definitely, about natural light and artificial light. Within natural light, there is a lot of benefit. It helps strengthen us health-wise. It also elevates our moods. There's something called seasonal affective disorder here. Because we have such long winters, there is a tendency for people, especially who are coming from tropical countries where there's always heat and bright sunlight and so on. When they come here and during the winter months, they feel depressed when they are indoors because there's not enough sunlight coming in. They can't go out much and so on. And initially, when I had started reading about that, I found out that actually, it's not that when they feel the seasonal affective disorder, that if you give them big windows, they'll feel better. In fact, some of them require that there be curtains on the windows so that they don't look out and see the winter terrain outside where, they feel more depressed by looking at those. So it's strange how in different ways different people are affected, but definitely where there is this exposure to sunlight, the exposure to nature, all that is said to be like a balm, a therapy for uplifting your mood. So wherever you're designing, think about the light, how it comes in, where does it come in, what kind of activities are done in that area where there is a lot of sun. So we moved into a new house, and we did not lay out our furniture for the first few. I mean, we put in the furniture, but we didn't finalize it because I just wanted to see how light travels through the house, and where I come from India, so I do need that sunlight. And wherever with time, when I noticed, and over the year, I noticed, especially in the winter, where the sunlight hits. And that's where we've got our cozy couches and other things laid out so that we can enjoy the sun as much as we can. So as designers, I think we should also be very cognizant of the movement of the sun, how it affects what activities. Do we need the sun in the bedroom, or do we need it in the kitchen? In a corporate environment, where do we need the sun? If we are working on a computer, we may not want the sun falling on the computer because it'll cause the glare. So think about those things, because it will definitely make people feel better, not only bodily, like physically, but also psychologically. So when it comes to lighting, again, this is from a very nice book, Fundamentals of Lighting, which is written by Susan Winship. I'm not sure if there's a new edition. I have the second edition. It's a old book that I have. But it's got these very nice diagrams about how lighting can be beneficial, artificial lighting especially. So for example, in the first figure, it talks about determining the appropriate location of a luminaire, that is the lamp, for reading, requires multiple measurements of people, furniture, and the fixture. Ideally, for reading, the total distance from the floor to the reader's eye level must equal the distance from the floor to the bottom of the shade. So if you see the eye at the eye level of a person, when they're sitting down on the furniture, that's where the bottom of this luminaire should be, so that there is no glare going into the eye of the person. So definitely it depends on what the seat height is, depends on the height of the person. But there are standards that are available. So you can also refer to the height of the eye when a person is seated for, say, a 5th percentile or a 95th percentile, and then try and figure out what the height of this table should be and how high the lamp should be. Similarly, in the other section, if you see here, it shows an elevation which illustrating the American Disability Act, which gives guidelines for wall-mounted luminaires. So if it is wall-mounted, how high should it be? Because you have to be inclusive. You have to think about people with disability, people who are walking with a cane, who have less visual acuity. They shouldn't go and collide into that light which is mounted on the wall. Then those are dimensions that are followed here. Similarly, where do we put the switches and outlets, the plug points that are there, so that people who are on a wheelchair, they can easily access them? And these are certain dimensions that are important to consider. And how this affects the psychology of the people in those spaces is they feel comfortable, they feel safe. It leads to less accidents, and it makes the design more inclusive and universal. Similarly, other things to consider, and all this may lead to better productivity. It will lead to less fatigue at work, because you have the proper posture, you have the proper lighting, your eyes are not getting strained. And I'm pretty sure all of you must have felt this, the Zoom fatigue that probably everybody feels, or even working on the computer all day long. Think about how setting up a space for yourself can really elevate some of those, the fatigue that it may be causing you right now. So, for example, in the first book, the first picture, it is the plan view of the placement of a luminaire on a desk or table for the purpose of reading and writing. To avoid shadows on the task, the luminaire should be located to the left side of a right-handed person and to the right side of a left-handed person. The bottom of the shade should be level with the eye of the user. So even when you're, say, designing in the kitchen, and you're standing on a counter and there is overhead lighting on the ceiling, you have to make sure that the lighting doesn't cast a shadow of the person standing on the counter space. It has to be placed such that it illuminates the counter. And that's why many times you might have seen under the cabinet counter lighting that are used to just cast a light onto the object or the place where you're working on the counter space rather than on top of your head. I really don't like, I have this light in my, it's one of those spotlights that is typically installed in the kitchen. And it just casts such a bad shadow when you're working. So we've tried to move it around. And it does make a lot of sense. Once you move it, you feel more comfortable in the space. Similarly, if you look at this second diagram, it's the plan view of the suggested placement of luminaires for working at a computer. So not exactly on top of the computer, but on the sides. And many times also, if they're not downlighters, so that they just don't create glare when you look up, if they're uplighters with light going towards the ceiling, being reflected and diffused down onto the work surface, it provides a better and consistent light. So if you see here, if the light is there in the third picture, it might produce glare. So think about those things when you're designing with light. The other thing you also have to consider is, okay, you put on the light, but what is it falling on? Is it falling on a glossy surface? Is it falling on an irregular surface? Is it falling on a matte surface? And the light then coming from the source is then altered. It diffuses, it reflects, it's a mixture of both. And then the quality of light changes. So it's not only the light, it's the color of the walls. It's the materials that are used on the table or on the floor that start to really make a difference. The other thing is, many a times we put ceiling lights, but when we walk in space, are we looking at the floor? So if we put a ceiling light, it's the floor that is being illuminated. We are not really being helped too much if the floor is just, of course, I'm not saying the floor should not be illuminated, but that's all we think of. What about the walls? What about some corners in the room? So you really have to look in totality to understand how light affects our perception of the space. What are we trying to make those people in the space look at? Is it the ceiling, floor, the furniture, the task lighting? What is it that we are concentrating on? So, and then again, the color, light and color also interact. So not going too much into the color theory, but you understand that there is a color wheel with the blue, red, and yellow as the primary colors. And when we mix up the primary, we get the secondary colors. And when we mix the secondaries, for example, green is gotten by mixing blue and yellow. And then when you mix blue and green, you get the tertiary blue-green. So that's really the color wheel, comprised of primary, secondary, and tertiary colors. And then there are some terms that are used. I'm not going to get into details, but you should know for yourself what is color temperature, what is value, hue. These are things that you should be able to understand. And definitely, if you see these three pictures in this are the same space. It's only the color scheme that has been varied. And it does give different emphasis. So for example, here the yellow wall is really the emphasis, whereas on the bottom right, you see there, we look at different areas. We probably look at that plant more than anything else. Here on the left hand bottom corner, we look at the patterns that are there on the fabric of the cushions that are put in there. So, and then if you see, these are different color schemes, and some of them are warm, some of them are more subtle. If you were to feel excited, it's the warm colors that get you excited. They even raise your blood pressure or suppress your appetite. There are lots of things, many times if you go to a restaurant, why do you feel like staying in that restaurant more? It's because probably the interiors, of course, the food, but also a lot of times it's the ambience that we're looking. What kind of light? Do we feel comfortable when we go there? Some of us may not have the same visual acuity as the other person. And then when the restaurant is really dark, and we go in there and we feel uncomfortable. So then in our minds, we think, oh, I don't like it. It's because we are feeling bodily, we are feeling the discomfort in there. Vidhu, tell me if I'm doing okay with time, and otherwise I'll.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, we have time.
Okay, okay. So here again, we understand the three characteristics. The hue is the pure color. The value is the relative lightness or darkness of a color. So for example, the yellow has low value, blue has the darker value. And saturation is when we start to play with the purity of the color. They are, if you look here on the left side, these are very vivid colors. They have high saturation, but then we start to desaturate them, and that progressively looks like gray. So you're really removing the color from it. And then you can measure actually the value of color is measured along on the gray scale. So for example, if you look here, the dark blue is closer in its value to the black, whereas the lighter shades are closer to value in white. And then once the hue, there are tints, shades, and tones. So whenever you add white, it becomes a tint. When you add black to a color, it's called a shade. These are technical terms because we say, oh, let's look at the shade card. But, or this, I'm going to use this shade of blue. Maybe I'm not referring to a shade, I'm referring to a tint. So we use shades very indiscriminately, but these are really the technical understanding of color. When you say tints, it means a color that is where white is added. A shade means a color and black added to it, and a gray, when gray is added to a color, those result in the tones of that color. Again, I told you the primary, secondary, and tertiary colors. I'm going to move on about these. And then there are warm and cool colors. Warm colors make us feel excited. They are lively. They also come towards us. So if there is a room which is very big, and if you have the warm colors on it, they make the room look, well, not smaller, but it feels that it's coming towards us. The walls are coming towards us. Whereas in cool colors, those cool colors recede. So many times, when we have low ceilings and we want to give an impression of height, then we put a cool color, a white color on the top. So psychologically, we are playing with people. It's the dimensions actually remain the same, but the perception of the space changes with color. And again, there are different color schemes that are there. So I'll just run, because I love to give you examples on this. Monochromatic color, mono meaning one. So use one color, but you can use any tints, tones, or shades, meaning you can add white, black, and gray to it. And when we are talking of color schemes, remember, we never talk about neutrals. So a monochromatic can have a black, it can have a gray, it can have a brown. Those are all neutral shades, neutral colors that can be added to it. So for example, here, red is the color that is used, and we use different tints, tones, and shades of red. So in this example, if you see, this is a monochromatic color scheme, and it's comprised of yellow. Okay, so mono meaning one, remember, and achromatic meaning no color, a meaning none, and chroma meaning color. So no color at all. It is only composed of black, white, gray, browns. Those are achromatic. So if you see, this is the example of an achromatic. Again, many times people have sensitivity to too much color. Even psychologically, some emotions may be triggered because, if a bright red will excite someone who has probably some trauma or something that is related to psychological problems, then the use of such colors are advised. A triadic color scheme, if you look here, it uses 3 colors which are equally spaced around a color wheel. So this would be an equilateral triangle. So this green, this purple, and the red. If you count between them, there are only 3 steps here, 3 steps here. So they're equidistant from each other. And this scheme really offers strong visual contrast because you're using colors which are relatively spaced out on the color wheel. And this is called the triadic because 3 colors are used. And if you see here, many times when you use a triadic color scheme, you're using a lot of color. Now imagine this whole space if you were to fill the 3 colors that you choose. So if you look here, it's very strategically done. They haven't taken all the 3 colors and filled it up everywhere. They're in smaller areas that they have put it in. And then most of it is balanced by neutral colors like white, black, and gray. The next one is called analogous color scheme. Analogous meaning they lie side by side. So these 3 colors, mostly you can use more than 3, but it's advisable that you use 3, otherwise it gives you a sensory overload. There are too many things. And sometimes, if we don't have the proper contrast, our mind is not able to see things. So you do have to maintain a figure background relationship where what is the background is really in a larger area, and whatever is in the foreground, in the front, has to be in smaller areas. So here, this is the example of the analogous color scheme, 3 colors on the color wheel, which are used side by side. And it's got a pleasing effect, but if you also see, it's not used in large areas, again, making sure that contrast is maintained. Then there is the split complementary. It's very interesting. Complementary means when you use opposite sides. So if I use this purple, I use the yellow. But a split complementary is I take one color, go to the other side of the color wheel, but I don't use this, I use the ones on the side. And that becomes a split complementary. Again, if you see here, it creates a lot of drama, right? Because opposite colors are used. So that was a quick summary. Then there is also the tetradic, where you use 4 colors, and these similar to the triadic, but it becomes a struggle once you have too many colors. Then how do you balance it off? Because otherwise it'll look like you've used there's no color scheme. So it's you need to be very particular with color when you're using it, because you don't want to overburden the mind and try and give all kinds of colors to someone who is residing in the room. Again, coming back to lighting, there are 3 kinds of lighting that we've also talked about earlier. One would be accent, one would be general lighting, and one would be task lighting. Make sure when you're doing any project, think of all of these, because our efficiency really increases with task lighting when we need it, when we have to do very precise work. If we have just general lighting, it doesn't really help. So these are certain things that you need to keep in mind. And then, of course, the idea of shadow. And there are many architects or designers who have used it. And they talk about how light and shadow are both important. And especially Louis Kahn's work, many of you must be familiar with him, his work, especially I am Ahmedabad in India. You should look into it and see how he plays with light and shade. But I also wanted to bring an example that many of you might have experienced, and this is about the Indian temple. And this whole idea that when you go towards the inner sanctum, which is called the Garbhagriha, and you go into there is progressively, it becomes small, it becomes dark, And it really, sometimes in some of the ancient temples, the Garbhagriha is really very small, the height is less as well. And there is this very divine feeling that you go when you go into those areas. And that is probably because many a times sensory deprivation also has a psychological effect on us. When we don't have too much of a sensory input, sensory in the sense we don't have too much color, we don't have too much light, we are probably then concentrating on other things. So for example, when you go in there, you feel the cold of the floor, or you feel the smell of the incense sticks. You feel your own body in that small space. So there are, other psychological awareness that starts to come, psychological and psychosomatic kind of awareness that starts to come in that space. So when we are designing, I don't think we should always think of how can I light the space well? Well, definitely for security, for the safety of inhabitants, definitely. But when you have to have an experience, when a person goes into say a spa and you have very bright disco lights, maybe I don't like it because, I've gone there to get some rest. And how do you balance those things? It becomes important. So here it's a very spiritual experience that you get. And probably when you think of lighting in here, you think of natural light, you think of in the night too, what kind of lighting would you provide for such a space? Similarly, in the Baroque and Rococo, when they were designing, they had these clear story windows, if you see on the top, where light would come in, but it would not be visible. To look at the scale of the people. So they really didn't know where the light was coming in. They couldn't see the windows. And that started to give that very mysterious a spiritual experience within this space. They also, what they did was, at that time, of course, there were political reasons for doing this, where the church wanted to establish its supremacy. So in these church spaces, the light would come in, and then on the top, they had what is called the quadratura. The quadratura is these illusionistic paintings that were done on the ceiling. And they were done in a perspectival view, and it seemed that the ceiling wasn't there. It looked like another world on the ceiling, and the light would come in and make that space really look very magical, as though another divine world had opened up on the top. So that was another thing. And again, even in the Rococo, you must have seen the use of these numerous windows, which were above the eyesight, and the natural light coming in and interacting with the artificial light, and how that started to bring about a very dramatic effect in those spaces. So Louis Kahn's, you should also look up when we talk of light and shadow. Definitely the Phillips Exeter Academy Library is a very nice case study to do, in which the lights, the beams, and the clear story windows and the openings are such that they bring in light in different angles within the library at different times. So it's a very interesting read. I thought I'll just put it out there for anyone who might be interested. So yes, when I started with a question, and for everyone, I think design is a verb. It as much as probably it is an adjective or a noun, but because it helps to shape behavior, it helps to shape health, helps to shape happiness. So in that sense, it's a verb. And many times, and I will show you a little, to end my talk, I will show you a little course that I have recently conducted, and called it Design is a Verb. And I helped students think of space not only as an aesthetic visual component or entity, but as something that can give impetus to how we live. How do we interact in space? How do we behave in space? How do we feel in space? And really, in that sense, design becomes a verb. It shapes behavior, it shapes health, happiness. And the interior designers do not create only aesthetics or spectacles. They enrich the bodies, minds, and the lives of the inhabitants. So we designers can become change makers in that sense. Also, the program that we create. So we were trying to figure out, what these students will do for their final design thesis, the dissertation that they have to submit at the end of their course. And many of them said, okay, I'm going to do a shopping center or shipping container home. But I said, why? What will it do? And I said, let's not think about what you will do. Let's start with a verb. And they started with a verb. They said, well, I want to create a space of happiness. I want to create a space of magic. I want to create a space of resolution. And then they started thinking of what the space would do rather than what the space would look like or what the solution could be. And that's why I see Deepika smiling there, but that's why I call design is a verb, probably more than anything. And there is a fantastic article, and it's by Beatrice Colomina, and she has written about tuberculosis, modernism, and COVID-19. And I'll just quote what she has written because she writes really well. I didn't want to paraphrase. But she says, in the early 20th century, architects and critics talked a lot about tuberculosis. In fact, it was their real obsession. But strangely enough, historians have ignored it, despite the fact that this obsession is everywhere, so obvious when you look and listen. It could be that this is what actually made a whole generation convinced that it was a good idea to move away from all those wall coverings, carpets, and draperies of the 19th century interior in favor of clean lines and clean architecture. Illness is what modernized architecture, not just new materials and technologies. Why? Because 1 in 7 people were dying from tuberculosis globally. But in a big metropolis like Paris, it was more like 1 in 3. Architects had a very good reason to want to clean up, not just aesthetically. And that's the central thesis of the book. Modern architecture has more to do with the campaign for health than with anything else. In fact, many of the ideas that modern architects were proposing didn't come from architectural theory. They came from doctors, nurses, and hospital architecture, particularly tuberculosis sanatoriums. I found that very, very striking because, all of us, most of my students, when I say, what kind of a style do you have? I have a modernist style. I have a minimalistic, clean design, that's what they say. But, here she's talking about how that was because we didn't want carpets, we didn't want draperies or coverings that had germs that could infect other people, and that's why they cleaned it up. They had more cleanable materials, less fabric, and so on. Even she has these pictures, and it shows how these sun terraces, for example, this is Alvar Aalto's building. All this was where they could get fresh air, so that anything that affects us in terms of health within an interior space, that could change with these open air terraces. So there's a very nice book called Architecture is a Verb by Sarah Robinson. I would suggest you read it and understand the potency of interior design of architecture. And these are some of the verbs that my students had worked on. Spaces of happiness, of negation, of silence, growth, support, healing, reconciliation, control, agency, sorrow, spaces of sorrow, spaces of noise. And when you start thinking of it in that way, it really, the idea of interior design changes. It's something that, starts to become very potent. Sorry, can you see my screen, the YouTube screen? And this is some of the GIFs that they had created. I'm just going to show a few of them. But this was when they started with the verbs and how interior design can change the way we live. I'm going to stop there. It goes on and on because I had like a lot of students, but it's really this whole idea of thinking of spaces not only as how they will look, what will it become, but what will they do? How will they affect us psychologically and emotionally and physically and all that? Really was at the core of this exercise. It took a lot of time because when I introduced this assignment to them, they were really taken aback and they were really stressed out. And they said, we don't know what we are supposed to do. And I said, I don't know what you're supposed to do. So we were like, okay, you have to think. And that's the point of the whole exercise, was to make them think that spaces are not just beautiful objects, with coordinated colors and whatnot. The potency of space has to be understood. So that's all from me. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pallavi. That was a wonderful presentation. And almost 90% of the students who are present here, they are in their first year who are learning something very similar. So they are in their spatial exploration studio. And this topic that you spoke today was very, very relevant. They are looking at their own spaces. We are all working remotely, so they are currently studying their own spaces where they are almost looking at the things that you spoke about. And I'm very sure they would have enjoyed this presentation today. So we just have about 3 or 4 minutes. If anybody wants to have a question or two, you may please ask Dr. Pallavi.
I do have to say the first years are the most interesting in that sense, because they come with a very open mind, and to keep it open is a struggle that we as teachers probably go through. We have to teach them, but we don't have to kill their curiosities, which is very difficult to achieve. Feel free to ask me any questions if you have, but if not, that's fine too. Did my presentation make any sense to you, or you thought, oh my God, what is she talking about?
No, absolutely made sense because these are things that they have been learning from the first semester, and these are like basics that they learn and really essential ones too that they must remember. We also have students across years, and there are some students from their thesis semester as well. So these are things that applies to everyone alike.
That's great.
We have with us our director, Dr. Madhu. She had joined a little late, so I didn't get to invite her before. Welcome, ma'am. And if you just want to say a few words, please do so.
Yeah, thank you, Architect Pallavi, for taking your time to be here today. You have made us understand that architect's role is not just creating more and more spaces. We have to think of the space efficiency, the functional usage of the space, the lighting effect, the colors, the textures, the pattern, the scale, all in an integrated manner. Until now, interior design was thought as a separate field, but now you have made them understand they have to think everything in an integrated manner. And you have also made us understand that our surroundings has an enormous effect on the way we behave, we feel. And the role of designer now has become more important, particularly during COVID. It's because we stay at a single place static for a long time. And now we would have realized the importance of all the interior design. We thoroughly enjoyed your lecture. I think our students would have also enjoyed more. Have a great weekend. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's nice to meet you again, Madhumati.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you have any questions, you can also, Vidhu, please feel free to share my email ID with any
Yes,
of the
ma'am, I'll
students.
share the details. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
So thank you again for the opportunity, and we'll be in touch.
Thank
Yes,
you. Thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you.
Dr. Pallavi. Thank you. We'll see you again.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Students, it's now time to begin with the panel discussion. But before we get going, I would like to quickly introduce our panelists. Firstly, we have an expert from the industry, Architect Tahir Zoeb. Architect Tahir is the design executive head of Triplo Studio, Chennai. He is a graduate in urban design from GSAP, Columbia University. Architect Tahir, along with his wife, Architect Anupriya, began Triplo Studio in 2010 with a robust team of architects, interior designers, urban designers, planners, and other professionals. The crew is driven by the philosophy of human-centered design that focuses on people and purpose rather than the scale and cost. They have also touched upon heritage management through Madras Inherited, an initiative for heritage conservation and management in Chennai. They are involved with the smart city proposals for Puducherry, encompassing social inclusion, urban renewal, adaptive reuse, pedestrianization, and rejuvenation of water bodies. Architect Tahir has also been associated with VIT for quite a while now. A warm welcome to Architect Tahir once again.
Thank you so much for the warm welcome and a very, very kind introduction. I look forward to this discussion. Thank you.
Next, we have Professor Vit-Vsparc. Professor Vit-Vsparc is a registered architect and urban designer and has practiced as a professional for over 33 years. After completing BArch from School of Architecture and Planning, Anna University, he went on to pursue his master's degree in urban design from SPM New Delhi. His works over the last 3 decades have extensively focused on architectural projects of all scales and include residential developments, institutional campuses, business workspaces, laboratories, and large-scale industries. As an urban designer, he has worked on several urban-level projects on the Varanasi Ghats of Uttar Pradesh, historic precincts of Fort Cochin and Mattacherry in Kerala. Additionally, his expertise as an urban designer is realized in the temple towns of Kanchipuram, Mylapore, and Mamallapuram. He has authored an operational manual for the Government Municipal Administration Department for provision of public sanitation services in Tamil Nadu. As much as he is an architect by profession, he is also an academician. He headed School of Architecture at VIT for 5 years since its inception in 2015. He has contributed greatly for building up the new school on both academic and administrative fronts. Presently, he is the design chair for the school, guiding and mentoring both the students and the faculty members. I take this opportunity to invite Professor Vit-Vsparc for this panel discussion.
Thank you so much, Deepika, for the kind introduction.
Good morning, sir. We have two faculty members from VIT School of Architecture among the panelists today, Dr. Sandeep Kota and Professor Vidhu Bansal. A brief intro on both of them. Dr. Sandeep is an associate professor at VIT School of Architecture. He started his academic career in 2016 when he first joined the department. He earned his doctorate from Texas A&M University College Station, USA in 2020, specializing in daylighting, building energy simulation, and building information modeling. At Vit-Vsparc, he teaches courses related to architectural technology and science and has a penchant to teaching and research. Welcome to the panel discussion, Dr. Sandeep.
Thank you, Dr. Deepika, for the wonderful introduction. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now, Professor Vidhu is currently working as an assistant professor in School of Architecture, VIT Vellore. She has done her bachelor's from Aligarh Muslim University and completed her master's from IIT Roorkee in urban and rural planning. She was a DAAD scholar during her master's and visited University of Darmstadt, Germany to complete her thesis work. She is currently pursuing her PhD in IIT Kharagpur and she's almost about to complete that. She specializes in urban planning, new urbanism, and planning for historical cities. She has worked with many organizations for academic collaborations, both at national and international level. She has also presented her works at various national and international conferences as well. A warm welcome to Professor Vidhu to the panel discussion.
Thank you, Deepika.
We have two students joining us from the final year, Ms. Bharanishri and Mr. Keshava, to add value to the discussion from the student perspective. Welcome, Bharani and Keshava, to the panel discussion.
Thank you.
Hello. Okay. Lastly, the moderator for the session, Dr. Michael Karasovich. Dr. Michael has a diploma in architecture technology from the British Columbia Institute of Technology, after which he took up his professional education at the University of Oregon and then Columbia University. He then worked at the architectural community of Vienna for some time before returning to New York City to work for Ralph Applebaum Associates designing museums. Michael is licensed to practice architecture in New York State as well as India. He is a member of the AIA, the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada, ISOCAR, and the Architecture, Culture and Spirituality Forum. He is involved in researching the unity of architecture and spirituality as practices to catalyze a rediscovery of the real meaning and importance of being an architect and evolve beyond today's form of professional practice. Now, I hand over the floor to Dr. Michael to initiate the panel discussion.
Thanks for the introduction. I'm glad to be here with all of you. It's going to be, I hope I'm going to be able to make this really interesting. I just wanted to confirm how much time we have. Are we finishing at noon or at 12:30? Because we're a little bit after 10 now. Can I confirm that? Or do we?
Yes, we could go on for an hour and a half mostly, and it should also really include questions from the audience as well.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this up with a little bit of an orientation, and then I'm going to prompt the panel with some questions. Some of them are going to be
there's a little bit of noise from, I think, Architect Tahir.
So we're going to do some questions which are more experiential and some of them which are more speculative. And then we'll finish off with each person can make a final statement. So given our time, I'm going to try and control it so that we will give the final statements starting at noon. if we get that far. And the statement should be just short, 5 minutes, just what you feel about this topic. And then afterward, we can have some Q&A if that is going to come out. So we're talking about online education or online teaching, which relates to online education. And the title, which was made very provocative by Ankit based on one of our discussions, is about the looming prospect of Professor Ankit, who's like the producer of this event. We had a discussion where it all of a sudden became something that online education is not going to go away, right? And we've all been kind of like holding back for a lot of years with online linkages of different kinds. And all of a sudden, like 2 years ago or a little more, we were thrown into it cold. Like literally in the middle of our semester, we were online fully. It was amazing that we just had to make a transition that had been before us for so long in a day, literally. So it will not go away because there's going to be budgetary pressure. It's cheaper to have an online university. Online universities will show up. 100% online universities will start showing up. People are going to try and make money from it. The quality is another issue, but if the parent is confronted with 10 lakhs less cost for this child's education, will they try for it? Some will, right? It's not going to go away unless the government regulates it to pieces and makes it go away. So here we're trying to think about the orientation of this panel is to find out what online education may offer in terms of freedoms and enhancement of whichever educational processes or outcomes you might think of. I mean, it's really a wide open spectrum. We're trying to find out what those advantages might be and what we can do with them as we move forward. I'm just reading from some of my notes here. We can't afford to just say we're not online because other schools are going to do it. And they're going to compete with us. And they're going to compete with us on the rupee, right? It's going to be a competition. Now in architecture, there's difficulties that don't come in a lot of other things. And we know that at VIT, we have labs and things which students have missed. So there's a requirement to be there personally, but still, there's simulations. People learn to fly an airplane by pretending they're flying an airplane, right? Computer simulation of almost everything is possible. So these things will be developed. There will be people producing these. Now, if we're going to think about this, I wanted to add one provocative point, which is the issue of identity, of architects' identity. The problem is that we're not able to see architecture for the technology in the buildings. This has been an ongoing problem in the profession for a long time, where we are unable to support ourselves against engineers. What's so different about architecture than engineering? The engineers are saying, what are you guys talking about? And they're winning, frankly. And even I've just signed up for the AIA conference in next year or this year. And everything is about building and about business. There's no talk about architecture in the whole conference. There's not a single lecture over 5 days about architecture. It's all about building and technology and business. This is like, there's going to be 10,000 people there. And there's no space for talking about architecture. That's education, or that's philosophy, or that, it's really amazing how separated that is. So if we think about returning back to online classes now, offline classes, real space classes now, there might be a tendency to think, oh, now we can go back to the fullness of architecture. Now we can go back to what we had before, and we're not going to be limited by online thinking. But I would like to propose a slight difference to that. I would like to propose that before the pandemic came and before the lockdown came, architectural education was deeply in question, deeply questionable, and deeply flawed. And coming back from online work, coming back from online does not mean we're coming back to the fullness of architecture. It means that we're taking a further step where we've had this interlude of being online, and now we're going to have to face all those issues in their fullness still, or again, right? So when we're coming back from this online world that we've had, my question is, what can we take forward which will benefit the evolution, the positive evolution of the education of architects, which is actually the evolution of the profession? Because the architects who come out, what they're thinking is going to push on the COA for its future development. Though those people will have attitudes and they'll say the COA fits me. No, I want to change the COA. I want to change how it's working, right? The only way it can change is if the people coming out now in 10 or 15 years start to take an attitude toward what it has to become. So the idea here is not to say that we're just returning to the good world of architecture as it was, but to say we were in an ongoing position of needing to make changes. And now we have more tools, which we were forced to gain by this situation. So that said, I think the format would be that we just kind of go through the people who are here on the panel, and I'll just put some questions out there for you to respond to. And over the cycle, we can start responding to each other as we go along. And then, you know, I don't know if it's possible to have a true free discussion right now because we've got too many people and everybody needs to be heard. So we'll keep it that way. So my first question for you would be, if a person went on sabbatical, well, let me put it this way. Okay, let me try this one. I would like each person to name an experience or something that they learned during the past 2.5 years of working online that surprised them or interested them very much about teaching online, about being online as a student. What is something that just struck you as something that you didn't expect or something that you didn't really, but you value now as being possibly a positive attribute? So let me see. That's the first question. So you can answer just a couple of minutes. As the moderator, I will take the authority that if somebody has decided to hold a longer lecture, that I'm going to ask you to please finish. Okay, I hope you can excuse me for doing that, but we want to get around to everybody as we go through this. So I'm going to take a little bit of authority if I have to. But the idea here is that we just kind of give a nice full answer to this, and then we'll see where it goes from here. So why don't we start with Professor Devi and see, you know, just kind of tell us about your experience of being online over the last couple of years, as much as you have had such experience with students.
Thank you, Professor Michael. I think those are some pretty interesting observations you made in the course of your talk now. I myself personally see some substantial benefits in certain dimensions on the online platform, and perhaps some things which, if you say, surprised me were that, number one, I think that when it came to discourse with students or with faculty members or part of the teaching fraternity on subjects which are very objectively to be discussed, such as theory subjects, such as anything which required empirical discussion, I found that it was quite easy to engage and to get elicit positive responses as well as objective outlooks to the whole exercise. This, I would say, is primarily because I think people were able to focus on points which were essentially scientific and which could be over a screen spoken about in a very rational and analytical fashion. So theory subjects, I think, were working out pretty good. I think the other thing I found was the unique opportunity to jump sessions, like especially in my personal capacity as a design chair, I found it incredibly valuable that I could participate in so many discussions across multiple events or platforms which were conducting those events, which in a normal physical situation, I might have had great difficulty because they would be geographically perhaps displaced in different places and I wouldn't really engage at the same level. So I would say, if you ask me for the positive aspects, what I really found in this was that objective discussions were very clear. Secondly, they were very uninterrupted for the most part, because people were, as long as they stuck to certain code of conduct on the platforms, and the effective output was quite good. As far as the multiple platform attendance was concerned, I found it incredibly useful. I would say these were two of the very positive aspects I found in the whole exercise. And I mean, there are related, I don't want to get into the accessory things which may have been challenges, because I think perhaps later discussions may take those up in a greater detail. Yeah.
Thank you very much. That was good. A big summation. I mean, you're giving so many observations, we might run out, but I hope we don't. Let's go to architect Taher next. Taher?
Hi, Michael. Thank you. So firstly, okay, positives. I always knew that there were a plethora of tools out there that allowed the transition to working online much prior to the COVID pandemic. And I just think we were thrown into the deep end of needing that to transition into it overnight. I think that's really what happened. But I do strongly believe that the online format, as you mentioned yourself, greatly improves logistics in many aspects of being able to conduct learning or teaching for a large group through some of the tools that are available. I think for me personally, as somebody who has been involved with VIT, I don't even think I would have got that opportunity had it not been for the online format. The logistics of me being able to come to Vellore would not have worked out if it wasn't for the online format. So that goes to tell you, why I really benefited greatly from it. And I think largely it's also the idea of the catchment and the network that an online format can allow that a physical format may not allow as effectively. So it's, when I say catchment, I'm talking about students from all over the place being able to come onto one medium or one platform. And when I talk about network, it's about being able to engage with people from all across the globe for learning. And I think the kind of learning that the kind of value addition that would have in any format of online teaching is invaluable. And I don't always believe that that's possible in the physical setup of a standardized classroom exclusively. So I'm very or I'm campaigning for a hybridized format, which I'm very excited and slightly terrified by at the same time. But I'm sure we'll talk about that more moving forward. Thanks.
That's very good. Thank you. That's a good view. I mean, I've benefited from that very much also in so many ways, because I come from different countries, right? So it has been amazing to bring in people I know in such an intimate way. Let's talk to Vidu next. Vidu?
Hi. For me, personal experience, it was good because we could experience perspectives from a lot of people from very varied geographical backgrounds, and which was not really possible had it been for offline experience. So that was a good one for me. But looking at a little bit on the con side of it, when we were taking studios classes, which was mostly of interacting with students and making them understand how the spaces come up or how they are able to experience space, that was something I found a little bit challenging, especially when we were dealing with our first year studios, because they are just fresh out of school, and it was becoming quite challenging. It was quite challenging for us to take them through to these kind of discourses. So I find myself little challenged there. But other than that, I think a hybrid form would be definitely something which we can look forward and can take away from this experience. And I think that could be a mantra to go to for architectural education, especially, so that we can get good from both of the worlds. We can have different perspectives from a lot of different people, as well as we can make people understand how to do it, like really do it on ground. Yeah, that's my take from the last 2 years.
Thanks. That was good. Thank you very much. Sandeep, Professor Sandeep.
Hi, Dr. Michael. Yes.
Hi.
Yeah, I think all the three people who have talked, that some of the points that I wanted to express, they have already expressed. So one aspect I wanted to highlight is like, yeah, the word barriers, there are certain barriers, like physical barrier. The online education enabled like the people who are far off, they could come online and give a lecture. And one aspect which I felt it is challenging is the technological barrier, because when I'm interacting with the students, some had a very good internet connection and some do not. And I think if the person is from that geography and he's connecting online, if the technological issue is there is a lack in the communication. I want to emphasize on that point. And another aspect which I also found out is there is this, a relation which is built interacting with the students or the faculty or for that a subject expert who is coming to the university, and that the interaction builds up. This did not facilitate it that much. Yes, there was this interaction between the students and the faculty and the externals, but to a degree that we used to have in a physical setting. I think that was a bit lacking in the online mode. So these are the 3 points that I wanted to.
That's very good. Yeah, when I asked the question, I didn't say, please name the great things that you discovered that surprised you. I mean, that's one thing that I found is that students who, especially when we first started, who did not have the proper technology were just so held back. And there was just nothing we could do about it. It was like somebody had become mute by force of technology. And it's like they're in the room and they can't speak. I was very, very surprised how absolute and difficult that barrier was, which I kind of forget now because everybody's acclimatized themselves so well, right? Now we have 2 students who are in their final year, and we'd like to hear from them. We'll start out with Parani.
Yeah. Okay, so I would like to take a little different point of view here. I would like to talk about the evolution of my work. So with online, I felt that there was the personal and like the process of finding a certain creating and prioritizing your values and everything, that became so much more amplified, because most of the time outside of studios and classes, what we're spending time is just our work. But in a physical setting, that would be, we would have to deal with the atmosphere of the whole school, which has its own advantages and positives. But I felt like the emphasis on the personal and like my work over the previous semesters informing the work that I'm doing now, that would have taken a lot more time if I was in a physical setting. That is something that is very valuable, and I'm sure a lot of us felt the same way. That's my I was really surprised by that, because I thought, the physical is where you meet people and that's how you grow. But this was a very different experience.
Very good. Yeah. Keshava?
Yes, sir. So I think online education has changed the way that we learn and we experience education in terms of architecture itself. Like, it has given many opportunities, like for people to study from anywhere, from any place, anytime. It could be your outstation or something. You could just have your time and talking to your guide or something like that, and you could have some conversations with him about your design and talking about how it's happening. Yes, the geographical aspects is very advantageous. Like, you could do it from anywhere, anytime itself. And because of this, I think how you introduce the whole thing itself, the number of architectural schools, like the way of teaching towards online education has been increased. And I think more people are also interested in because of its budget friendly thing, and also people are likely to stay at their comfort and learn the things how they used to happen. But there are negatives to the e-learning aspects too. Like I think when we go deep into it towards the e-learning, how the people are studying from like not only architecture, I would say many people study like the pre-recorded sessions, which are not the experience of a teacher or an expert from the field who is teaching to us. So that is not very amplified in that particular e-learning situation. But what we are doing, like in Vit-Vsparc, is to think the best out of it, what we could do in this particular situation, like from an expert, how we take guidance in a particular design, what we are talking about is what is different from another field. So this is what I think.
Okay, thanks. So that's one round through everybody, and it's really amazing. You know, you get a breadth of views that you know, really shows you once again the value of such a panel and putting everyone together in an intimate space. And again, I think that it would be different if we were all sitting behind a table at the front of a room with 200 people looking at us. You can even think about that, like that difference, right? I think there's a tendency that we're all speaking very personally to each other, a little more personally than we would be if there was a big room and we're saying, oh, I'm speaking to a group. There's a kind of a molecular idea of speaking to everyone as a group, but it remains individual in some peculiar way. Okay, that's my little commentary. Moving along, I think we still got plenty of time. So in order to make the questions something that you can get into, like I could ask a very simple question like this one, or I could move forward into something that's a little more, or a topic that's a little more complex. If you think about, let's just move one step forward in experience. Like if you think about what you had happen over this last period, what would you have liked? What is the first thing you can think of that you would like to enhance your experience of being online? Like if you're saying, I have to be online, but I wish I had this or that happen to make it better. What would be, do you have ideas for that? Would there be an answer to that? Let's start with, I don't know, I don't want to put Keshava on the spot. You want to start, Keshava? We can go reverse order.
Sure, sir. So I think when it was told that after this COVID, when we think about online education, like the people will all of a sudden starting online classes, but online classes were already a thing before it, like how people were starting to engage online classes before, like how where there was no geographical like barrier to them, like people could enhance their feelings and enhance their the design output from different parts of the world. What I think that is one of the things I want to happen when if it's happening offline too, like how to go towards on offline. If we could take the advantage of having this particular sessions having with different geographical conditions, locations, like we could take that part to a certain extent where people could take opinions from different parts of the world and enhance that particular output.
Yeah, that's an important one, and it will shatter a lot of assumptions by a lot of people, right? And that's true. That's an important one. Barani?
Okay, for this one, I would like to say that the one big the thing that I found missing throughout the 2 years is that spontaneous discussions and having different point of views presented to you within a matter of seconds. You know, even now when I think about the work and how we're getting inputs as students, it's not, it's happening in a very methodical fashion where you have to discuss with someone and schedule a meeting. So I know it will be really difficult to do with like keeping the online mode as it is, but if we were to, you know, somehow experiment and bring that aspect into it, then that would become so much more powerful, is what I think, the spontaneous discussions and meetings.
Have you ever participated in an online forum of any kind? Like there's quite a few, like when you go to conference, sometimes they provided an online cafe where people could come with an avatar and start to interact. Have you ever done that?
No, it's not that way, but what I'm saying this based on a few of the conferences that I attended last year, where there would be this one person that would, you know, from the institute which is holding the conference, and he would take the responsibility of conducting discussions on the chat. So yeah, it would be very spontaneous, and a lot of things would be reflected there, and you know that just builds the discourse and it feeds back into the discussion. So it's very difficult. I'm sure like it's it's very primitive right now, but
Yeah.
I think that's a very
Well, that kind of thing can work. But I've been in a couple of things where they had such a cafe, and it was really it was, well, maybe it wasn't the only. I've only experienced it a couple of times, but it was really desolate. It felt really like I'm wandering. My avatar is there on the screen going around, and there's people bumping into it and things happening, but it didn't. It felt so unreal. I mean, it was really. But I think maybe something like that could be evolved, right? There's a lot of people trying to make money off it. Sandeep?
Yes. I was I had a difficulty in communicating with my students while I was handling the design class, and like I had to call them one by one and keep discussing. In a physical environment, all the students will be in the class, and I can easily go to the students and discuss with them. And if they have any doubts after my discussion is over, they can always approach me and get a clarification. This kind of uh, uh, atmosphere was lacking in the online because it was very sequential, going giving a time slot for a student and going. And also, if an external expert is there, and we have to sequence the students so that they can discuss with the external expert. So these were the two constraints which I have found out. I was pondering on this very deeply, and I was thinking like what I could improve. Like, is there any technology which would almost facilitate this kind of spontaneous interaction? Yes, I am seeing all, provided that the technology is all set and I can have this kind of, all the students are online and very spontaneously I am interacting with them. So I want to emphasize on technology, like improving the technology, which will facilitate this kind of atmosphere which we find in the physical studio. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I understand. I mean, it's very similar to Barani's concern, but speaking from the other side, so to speak, where you're trying to just find out what's going on, and it's very hard to find a forum to do that without just making it very pointed and saying, I want to talk to you tomorrow at 4 p.m., which is an entirely different thing, right?
And one more point I wanted to tell. While I was doing in this design studio, we are critiquing the design, and we are recording and giving the recordings to students, and they're also learning. One-on-one interaction is happening. But when we are doing a studio, which is where they have to do a hands-on exercise, it was very constrained. I used to take this applied climatology class, and I used to teach for like 1.5 hours or 2 hours, and I expected the students to work during that time, but I can't really look into all the students whether they are working. So this really, like, it's a huge constraint in teaching, especially lab. If it is a physical lab, like the other departments are facing a huge crisis in that, how to conduct the physical experiment. Yes, some of the courses which I'm teaching, they can be taught online, like even the software. We're just dealing with the software. But if it is any, yes, in fact, when I wrote the curriculum for applied climatology, I wanted to do a experimental, studios, like using the instrument and all. Those could not be facilitated. So that's just my experience from taking those classes. I mean, I think the other professors might be having a different experience with a different kind of courses. Yeah.
But exactly in such climatological experiments, you could actually start to say you wanted to make some money, Sandeep. You could develop a simulator and sell it all over the world. I think you might get rich if you sold a kind of climate simulator lab system, right? Where you could actually have a physical kit where you do physical things in your space, but it's all done by a simulation based on algorithms, right?
Yeah.
You could, for the basics, right? For the basics, for understanding, it would be possible, wouldn't it?
That's definitely a wonderful idea to explore, and thanks for sharing that. And I think you touched on one point, like the simulation, how we can create a simulation environment where the students can really get into and learn. I mean, because each and every course has its own constraints. Like, I mean, the subject matter is different. Like a design is different, a
Sure.
theory is different, and a lab is different. So yeah, I mean, definitely.
Mhm. Thanks. We'll go on to Vidu.
Yeah. For me, I think constraint wise, I could find that there are two, three things. One is when we used to take any classes, and it is there, like I've discussed with my friends also. Many of the time, the students are not really like opening their cameras, and it's like teaching to a blank screen. And I understand that maybe they are not really in a position to, like, they are in the comforts of their home, so they are just listening to us, sincerely listening to us. But we as a teacher on the other part, we also get intimidated by the feeling that maybe I'm not really able to connect with my students, so maybe I'm not able to deliver them something which is very close to my heart. I have given it a lot of thought, but I don't know why they are not connecting. So these kind of self doubts happen. Then another point which I found is uh, being in an online mode. This was something which was imposed upon us, and something which is imposed upon us never really have that freedom of choice is not there, and hence it's like more of a imposed upon decision. So I think there is an exhaustion of some kind, which we can all feel that fatigue is there, and we are not really able to understand this thing, and it's there. So this is something which I found, which were like constraints in these 2 years. And also talking about simulation, I also did a couple of photography classes, and I find that it's very difficult to teach them such kind of very hands-on skills through online-based classes. And there were a lot of COVID restrictions. People were not able to move out, and most of the assignments required people to move out and look through their lenses and to get a perspective. So yeah, there were constraints, and I really don't have quite answers to how to do these things. There are a few things which can be done when we have the full capacity of moving in the environment. So yeah, those were things which are there. Maybe we can find some solutions maybe later sometime. That's all.
Yeah, well, that's why I framed the question the way I did, because instead of like listing a lot of things that don't work, we can also have a feeling of saying, oh, I wish I had this. And then when you go with the feeling of, oh, I wish I had this, then you can actually turn around and reverse engineer that and figure out what it's a response to.
Yeah.
So I wish I had, something, and then you say, oh, actually, I didn't even notice that this was bothering me, but I really, so, but I think that the idea of the, photography and going out, it's the same as when we had to visit the village to measure, and the villagers let the students in the first time, and the second time they realized the COVID thing and they didn't let them come back. And there were all sorts of things like that happening. Okay, I think we're up to Taher, who's already here. Hi.
Hi. So I think a couple of that you raised and some of the other panelists raised, the non was something that, and to just establish a little context for the other listeners, I happened to study at a period which maybe was a cusp between working predominantly digitally and prior to which we used to use overhead projectors, which was a translucent piece of sheets that would then forecast information on the screen. It would be very, very limited information. So from that perspective, I think the online format offers so much possibility. But to address the question itself at hand, personally, one of the things that I felt was a constraint is the access to data that was legitimate. So as a result, especially at a study stage of not just design, but any course for that matter, data that needed to be sensitive to the local context, local surroundings, immediate environments was not really there. And as a result, I felt like the extent to which one could engage in the virtual world itself was not as, say, useful an exercise than, of course, being physically present. The faculty before me spoke beautifully about the sensorial and psychological behind, understanding spaces and understanding design. But for me, largely, if I were to summarize the question at hand, Michael, it would be data, and legitimate data that I feel. And now with the online format, though, there is a silver lining, in my opinion, which is that the sharing and exchange of knowledge, not just within a university, but across universities, has now opened up immense possibility for us to create data and create information that we can all share from and learn from, and instead of working in silos, as most of us may have been doing prior to this, which goes back to the crisis that you were talking about prior to the pandemic itself. So data, in one word, would be my constraint.
Yeah, well, it's the constraint and the opportunity, correct? It's, as you were saying, you want more data. So on the one hand, you want to come online and have access to a pool of data, like they do in the movies, right? They have the 3D spatial computer and people are moving information around with waving their arms, It would be cool if we would be online like that and people would be part of that information that was there. The one thing that we have, of course, is we have a really in-depth record of all of our classes, of all of our studios, which, if you think about it, before this, it was almost all gone. It was just paper that students, you would have to collect so much paper, it was impossible. And so the acquisition of data is really powerful, for sure. And so the feeling to be able to access it more freely, would that be an interface? Do you think that would be different interfaces? I mean, we're using our regular computers. Would there be an idea for a specific kind of online interface that would make this better? Can you picture something like that?
I absolutely think there can be. In fact, through these 2 years of looking at a screen, someone like me who's generally a little animated and likes to,
yeah, I know.
I feel like I'm just talking to something that's flat, but I understand all of this is already changing. We've got virtual worlds that are being created, and like I said earlier, I'm excited and terrified about that at the same time. But during that course of the last 2 years, I've spoken a lot to students. I've understood to a great extent the fatigue that some of them feel by just staring at a static screen for a long time. But having said that, the ingenuity and the innovation that I've seen from students, I don't think Barney and Keshav will want to comment about this, but the way they could be online but not be online at the same time, the way a video could be looking like the camera's on but it's not on at the same time, the ways they negotiated these systems were just very fascinating to just listen to, as somebody who is not a full-time academician but is very, very passionate about teaching. And I was just of the opinion that if that kind of innovation can be applied to some of these things that you brought up about exchanging of information, sharing of data, creating a platform or a resource that allows us to do that, I mean, the potential and the opportunities are endless. And I'm excited about that prospect, because that's one thing that, especially if I can speak for the local context, is something that we need, and students are the best source to really go out there, engage with the surroundings and create information, and that's useful, and that can create a future that's better for all of us, and that's largely what it's all about.
Wow, sounds exciting. I'm ready. Even though I'm not, I would never say I'm an online kind of guy. And the way you put it, it sounds like swimming in this huge sea of communication and data. Let's go to Devi on this one.
Yeah, I would like to speak about this, of course, relevant to the architectural profession and architectural education more specifically, although several of these points may apply to other fields of study as well. I think I look at this wish list, or how I would look at this whole scenario from the viewpoint of content and from the viewpoint of personality development. I think both of them are important for anybody who is in the process of, the youthful stage of about to enter life. Now, when it comes to content, I would, I just briefly go through what we speak about as online education in this very broad sense. You've got an asynchronous system where it's like a neutralized environment where people are putting in some sort of pre-recorded lectures on a platform, and then giving you some exercises, and they say you finish it, you upload it. There is a robotic feeling to this whole thing that you really don't engage with anybody. Most of the courses which have large registrations go through this asynchronous online learning process. In a synchronized learning process, they have some part of this which is very robotic, and there's some part of it where they actually physically, in terms of online, they help you to engage with tutors. In the hybrid system uses the synchronous and the asynchronous models to optimize according to the courses that they are actually doing. So depending on the depth you need to actually interact, you're given that percentage of interacting with the person online. And the rest of it is robotic. So to say, pre-recorded or with assignments, etc. What we are talking about possibly for architecture, which I feel is my wish list, is blended learning, which is what we're all, I think, reasonably in conformity with, which is blended learning is wherein you take the best of online learning, where all the empirical subjects, where all the objective learning is done online in the convenience of people's either dormitories or their homes or wherever. And there is a substantial amount of learning with hands-on in the environment of their institutions, because that's the only way they can get the infrastructure and the cumulative groupism required to foster or to sustain such processes. So I feel blended learning is really what is needed for the architectural profession, which would be my wish list if I were to say that we were to go online and also add something more to it. The second thing which I think is in an online platform is, I think, in the design and related subjects. Design, wherever there's, let's say, subjective discussion, the scalability of the vision of what we see. On a screen, which is even a 21-inch screen, leave alone a laptop, the kind of nuances that you can actually figure out on a screen are very little. And the kind of interactive process, not like you just flip a page or you just can, use a pencil and just point somewhere. The whole digital method of doing it is more laborious, and it takes time for people to engage with each other, let's say for a nuanced discussion about a specific aspect of a design problem. And by the time you pan and screen and zoom and do all the other things which are required, you've lost a lot of energy in the process. So one of the things I think we need, if we would like to take up some more engagement, is scalability. See everything much bigger, be able to read it much better. The other thing which I would be very happy if we could do, which in the physical environment we are able to do, is to actually go back and forth between what we saw earlier and what we see now. For an example, if you're reading a book, whether it could be a textbook or it could be a novel, you see a reference point somewhere. It takes you like a few seconds to just riffle back and you find the page you wanted to see. And you're able to see it and you say, hey, I wanted to relate that to what is being said now. Now on the screen, that's pretty impossible. So is there some way we can do it where, let's say the previous three students ago we were reviewing, we could see that person's work and say, hey, that person had a great solution there. Now, instead of saying, hey, is he online? Oh, I see he's online, but maybe he's gone for a toilet break. Can you just come back? Can you please just open that screen again? Oh, yes, not that one, the third page. Oh, no, the bottom left corner, pan, please move. It becomes a very laborious process. In that process, you sometimes wonder, is it worth it? While in a physical display, you can just walk around and you just come with me and just look at it and show them what you want. So I feel we need this blended learning process where you have some places where you really are actually touching, feeling, sensing. I think that's part of the game of architecture. The second point I'd like to talk to about is proxemics. Proxemics, where we study about people and their relationship to space. Now, as we all know, we have intimate spaces, we have personal spaces. I mean, this was a word coined by a person called Edward Hall. He spoke about proxemics because he spoke about it in terms of the relationship of people with respect to their spatial environments. So if it's intimate, it's maybe with somebody you're very close with, maybe your father, mother, your romantic partner. And if it's social, if it's personal, maybe you're with a business colleague, you're shaking hands with somebody. If it is social, it would be maybe in a classroom environment. You're giving a lecture, somebody's about 10 feet away or 3 meters away and listening to you. And if it's public, you're listening to some politician talking on a stage and you're about 200 meters away and the loudspeakers blaring in your ear. Now we've got this new dimension, which is where you're sitting in front of a screen 3,000 miles away. Now, this was not perhaps coined anywhere by Edward Hall, but the virtual which is coming in here is that you're sitting in a rocket on a NASA mission and you're talking to your family back on Earth, or you could be sitting in the jungles of the Amazon and speaking to somebody in Chennai. Now, this is a very different kind of connect. This is actually an ethereal connect. It is not a spatial connect at all. It is completely virtual. And these kind of psychological influences of such a connect are very different from the connects which you see when you sense humanity around you. Here, there is no humanity. I think this dimension and the manner in which we respond from the perception of our cognitive senses, from the way we react to people and things around us, has a profound effect on the way we actually perform. Whether it's negative or positive, I will not be able to really state clearly, but it's a very important point I feel that we must keep in mind. The second aspect, this is about mainly about the content which I was talking about and how we deliver it. Second aspect is about the personality development of a student, which I had said would be that second aspect. Now, my wish list, if I were to say online, how could I improve? No, this can't happen online. We are talking about architecture, and I feel that it's a humanities subject. It basically deals with humans. And if you are able to go through a whole program on architecture, and let us presume theoretically that you didn't have to see a single human flesh, skin, smell, or sense their distance from you, or feel comfortable or uncomfortable around them, I don't think you can design buildings for them. I don't think you can design environments for people. I think you need to sense. I think that sensorial perception is absolutely a necessity. It's not an option. So from that viewpoint, I'd say that the kind of personality development and especially the body language, even in a large auditorium, if you're sitting and talking to somebody, courage, the ability to actually put forward your ideas, boldness, the idea to speak in spite of all the situation around you, I think is the most positive that you need. So from the viewpoint of personality development, I think the online needs an enhancement, which I can't project here, but I think it's the perhaps most important thing of the growth of a student during the youthful years of their life. I remember, since Professor Michael brought up the idea of the green screen and the movies which are taken with people performing any kind of act in front of a green screen, and then they just plug it into a virtual environment and they're on Mars or wherever it is. I recently saw on TV the actress Halle Berry. She's a pretty famous actress. So she is taking, I think they're releasing a movie called Moonfall or something like that, which is how the moon crashes into the earth, something like that, and whatever. And she was saying, when I took the scenes, I was actually doing all these gyrations on a blank studio floor with a green screen. And so when I did that, even I didn't know whether I had done it right till they actually gave me the preview of the movie, and I saw it along with so many other people who were seeing it for the first time, which meant that she said, sometimes I said, I think I did an awful job. I didn't do it right. Did I really look like that in this environment? I must have been crazy. So I think that whole personality, the way we sense, is so critical that I can't actually remove it or even try to remove it from the field of architectural and creatives, any kind of creative pursuits. Finally, I'd like to say that we also have to make a broad assumption that all students who are part of the system of learning are actually interested in the learning. The assumption in online learning is that students who take part know time management skills and are actually focused on learning. This has happened because many online courses in the before about 3-4 years were all about people who are working individuals who could just scrape in some time and actually take an online course and try to improve their skills. So they never missed a course. And they paid for all those courses very heavily because they knew they had to get those skills and they couldn't dodge a class, so to say. But here it's seen as a process of, most education is seen as a process of getting a degree or something like that. You sit online or you sit offline, it doesn't make a difference at the end of it. If you get your degree, you think, I'm not talking about all kind of countries and all environments, but where I'm saying pretty much I can speak for the Indian environment where parents support the children and for most part, and they feel that it's a bit of an entitlement. As long as we get the degree, it's fine. The learning, okay, let's get 50% of it, it's okay, but we get the degree. So I think it's very important that in this whole online business, we realize that students have to have the energy and the focus to learn and the integrity to learn. If we make that assumption right, most of the other things I think will fall in place. Thank you.
So you're saying, Devi, that you're saying that you have to have the assumption that they want to learn, and then you go forward with that, and whether they do it or not, or whether they have that feeling or not, is something you have no control over. But if you act as if they're totally interested, as if they're totally focused on their education, that's what you're kind of saying, is that it's an impetus on the instructor or the professor to enact that.
I think I think the student must have some energies coming from them first, because in an online platform, unlike a physical platform, for instance, where I know for certain that many of us have even walked our students up to a cafe nearby or to the canteen and spoken to them and motivated them, done other things which are far more personal in nature. Human beings so important, and that is lacking here. So much ever I may be verbose, I may be, very eloquent, and how much ever I might jump on the screen, there's only that much impact you can make on a screen with a moving set of pixels.
Sure.
I think that's important to have that physical connect. So I think in the online system that there must be energy from the student and time management. I feel the focus must start from them a bit. Otherwise, very difficult for a tutor to really nurture it.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to add 2 points to what David was talking about. I think they are in line with his thought, what he's proposing. And one aspect is the physical interaction with the site. Like, for example, if you have a site and we can take a pictures and we can see this, do something with the site. But if you are really in the site as a student, you are in the site and you are doing a design project, the ideas that a student could get by just being physically in the site, it can never be brought through pictures or videos on an online world. It will. It's a different dimension just being in the site. Okay, and another one is there is a sense of physical presence and the reverence. Like I want to use reverence because I think it might not be such a welcoming word, but I really want to use this in this context. When a professor comes to a class to teach, there is a sense of reverence which is instilled in the student because he is there. And the attention of the student, just because he is there in the class while he is lecturing or taking, the attention span is navigated towards it. Like in the online, yes, I don't see students. I don't know whether they're paying the attention. I'm not blaming the students, but I'm saying like, okay, I switch off the camera. I need not see the professor unless he calls me. So I think just in that physical presence, it kind of puts them, even though they don't like to be, constrained, But in a physical setting, when the professor is there, they are kind of, I don't want to use force. They are kind of forced to pay attention. I think down the lane, while as they were assimilating the knowledge which is transferred by the professor, it might create an interest. It might create an interest. And okay, sir, initially I did not pay attention. Now sir is talking something, and all of a sudden he is, I mean, when professor is there, you don't want to like look like as if you're minding your own business in the class. I mean, there is this, you have to pay attention to some degree.
Sure.
And that thing online, we are not getting.
No, because the physical space isn't there.
Exactly.
I had the feeling, when I'm looking at the screen right now, I'm not thinking about pixels. I'm thinking about your face. I'm actually creating a magical act and turning my screen into a real space in my mind. I do that all the time. I can't see it. And actually I can feel what it's like if it was just a screen when I have a panel full of student icons, right? Just the box, right? Then I feel more like what the screen is actually like. But when I'm looking at you or Devi or all the others, I don't feel like I'm looking at the screen. I feel like I'm looking at the person. My mind skips the other part of like the screen being in between, But still, we're not, like, it's the same as we were talking about. If this panel was in front of an audience of 200 people, there's something gained and there's also something lost because we lose our individuality to some degree when we're up there. I wanted to comment on one thing that Devi said and pointed out. He touched on something which we'll deal with a little later, is the issues of the profession as it is. When you talked about personality development and the development of sensorial perception, right? I would have to say that that's a profound problem in most architectural businesses. Business, I use the word advisedly. I'm aware I'm using the word business. Is that you're in the office and you're pumping out the work. You're pumping out the requirements for the deadline. We are not thinking about people. We are not thinking, we're in the computer, we're doing our BIM or whatever we're doing, and we're just technically creating this building. And any kind of sensorial idea of the people that are going to use this building was like cut off at the very beginning of the conceptual phase, right? And there are very, very, very few architects who maintain that connection all the way through a project in a reasonably profound way. So this is one of the interesting things, that working online makes that issue more pointed. That's all I wanted to bring up, is what you were brought up. The points you brought up are really good. You were thinking about online, but I can see how this argument would work for the way most architects work in most businesses, where you require so many technical requirements. You have a bank of 50, in some projects like an airport, you'll have 50 technicians or 50 architects who are working as technicians with no connection to sensorial realities whatsoever, except for their fingers touching their keyboards. So that's one of the opportunities that I see, and why I was provocating at the beginning, where the online experience can highlight issues that are present in architecture, even in a non-online situation, even in non-education, even in education and in practice. So I thought I'd just mention that because I think that's a good doorstep to that whole issue. I would like to go to, if there's no more comments on this, I could go to a third.
No, I think I'd just like to, if I may.
Okay, who else was speaking? Because you can go next.
Tahir, did you want to say something? You can go ahead.
After you, Devi. After you. No,
okay.
I'll.
Now, I think substantially, I think many architects, and I have that faith in them, that pretty much they carry through a lot of this, what we call maybe conceptual, philosophical outlooks, which they start with in the projects. I think they carry through a lot through their process of the execution of the work as well. I think what we see in offices is really the actual second part, which is the total reproduction of those ideas into a technical manner to communicate for execution. But I think in the beginning, personally, I can speak for myself for sure. Definitely, I relate to sites I relate to people, and I try my best to see that that equation is not defiled. It's possible there are compromises. There are always compromises in many equations. But at the end of the day, I think, and I believe that many architects are like that, unless you're, I mean, you just have this whole breed of, call them, I don't know, promoters or land, somebody who just look at numbers alone and not look at anything beyond that. Well, I can't really comment on that. But I think pretty much if you're a sensitive architect, I think you can have the best of both worlds. I mean, it's just a statement which I thought I'd make personally, because I think it's very important to say that you have a sense of belonging, immersion in what you're doing, and you are responsible for what you turn out. And it's not just a product you turn out like from a factory.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, it could be, sorry, go ahead, Tahir.
I think Tahir was going to go next.
Yeah,
So
yeah. That's so.
Okay, Tahir.
Okay, so firstly, again, thank you, Zoom, for letting me do this in a car. So in continuation to the point that you made, Devi, I think the seeds of what we want to plant through the 5 years are, for instance, empathy towards community, towards our society. I think we're talking about, we talk a lot about the built environment being a living being. So it's also about feeling the pulse of the place, engaging with the context. And I know, so what is exciting in one way is, one could argue that that's best done by emerging themselves in physical reality. But well, the virtual space allows you to hopefully gain some of these qualities that we try to instill through these 5 years, especially through other means as well. And that's where I went back to data being one of those things. But I know that there are a lot of other aspects that one has to factor in. But largely, I think this is something that I'm excited about, and also curious to see how this shapes up. And maybe there's that mixed learning that I think collectively all of us are talking about to make it happen. Over to you, Sandeep. Thanks.
Actually, it's a small analogy which I wanted to say about, McDonald's burger, or you go to a restaurant where they will prepare a nice meal. I think that it's what I was thinking is that as Devisa was mentioning that in the offices they produce the technical drawing, but yes, those ideas, the concept or the philosophy are there in the mind of the architects who are working on the project. And yet we find architects who are very passionate about, and who want to completely get immersed in the project and work out several different dimensions, and to bring up the wonderful solution, which is like, which is like in a masterpiece. And on the other hand, I think that there is a commercial aspect to it. And even though an architect, I never practiced, but I think from the logic I'm deducting this one, that yes, there is a budget constraint, and client wants like this, and the architect is supposed to give that one. And the whole idea or the philosophy of the architect want to bring in the project is just stop. So we are looking at both the situations, but where the freedom is definitely, I think the way an architect really brings in the product, it is conditioned upon his learning in the school. And if we are exposed to bright minds, and that we are transferring the knowledge from the faculty to the students who are going to practice as an architect, I think we do have a wonderful architecture being created. But like, history is really replete with wonderful projects. Like when we look at I mean, I haven't practiced, I'm again saying I haven't practiced architecture, I've been an academician. We see wonderful buildings which are done by architects. There is so much of thought process went into creating this edifice, and there are like very mediocre, very mundane buildings which are also there. So I mean, Sanjay Mohan, when he came, in my viewpoint, when he was talking about our own department, I felt on the first glance, I mean, this is my perception when I saw there is so much of circulation space in the Vit-Vsparc department. But when he was really explaining the essence why he has created, wow, this is like so nice. I mean, he went to such an extent, he really pondered about all these things, and he came up with this such wonderful. And right now, when my another colleagues and I, when we enter from the outside, the space is really sustainable, and we can see the difference from the outside to inside. I think he has put a lot of thought process in creating this building. So yeah, that's the point which I wanted to make.
Okay, thanks. I think we're you know, even just so far, if you go through the recording, we're creating an arc covering so many issues that if you actually took it apart and listed everything out, we're actually creating a brilliant summary here. And I think we can go forward with that. I have another question, which is more speculative, and it's more designed around faculty, but I think students can also perhaps answer. So here's my scenario, okay? A faculty goes on sabbatical on January 2020 and comes back for the fall semester of 2022, right? He's been out of the game for 2.5 years, hasn't seen anything. If he comes back, what do you think that faculty would be missing? What do you think that faculty would not understand about all of us who have gone through this 2.5 years? Now, that's a tough one, but I was thinking, well, I mean, this is a way to kind of portray the change that we've gone through this period of teaching this way. And if you could think, well, if I had come back, if I missed this whole thing, what would I not know? What would I not know if I had missed this whole thing? So is there anybody, I mean, I'm going to leave it open. Does anybody have I don't want to put anybody on the spot. So I thought, does anybody have a kind of an answer to that kind of narrative, if you will, a story, right? There's a person who just, because I know somebody in Canada, actually, she's a really, you know, she's spread all over the place and working on so many things. And two people, they actually decided to go on sabbatical when COVID hit because they're at the top of their career, right? So they just dropped out for all of COVID, they just dropped out. And of course, they're not teaching much because they're more administrative. But I was thinking, if you're teaching, what would you have missed? What would you be missing if you hadn't gone through this? Anybody?
I would like to propose a hypothetical situation. Can I go first? Is it okay if I go first? Hello, you are mute, Dr. Michael.
I was going to say first you, then Devi, and then whoever else wants to go. Okay, so we're gonna, Sandeep, you can go ahead. Try and keep it contained because we still got a ways to go.
Yeah, so definitely. Thank you. So if I take I'm proposing a hypothetical situation. Let's say we have gone to do research in a different university during the sabbatical year. I'm sure that we are engrossed in one task, not interacting with the students while we are doing this research. But at the same time, because of the pandemic, I mean, the social distancing has come and we got into the online mode. Even though I'm working on one single task, I will be experiencing the same thing in my research work too. I'm not interacting with the students and teaching, but I'm interacting with the other people. And because the pandemic is everywhere, it's not like, you know, just in India. So what I will be getting some experience when I get back. I will not be like, finding it surprising to interact with the students. But however, the nuances of how to deal to teach with the courses, different kinds of courses, I might not be learning because I'm working on a research project. So that is my, I will not miss much, but I might miss certain aspects where I can effectively deal if I had gone through the experience on teaching in the pandemic. Did it make sense what I had told? I will be trained. I will be trained to teach the students because I was. I mean, you are in a pandemic situation, but you have to interact, and that kind of training I would have. But how to deal with the particular courses I might be missing.
Right. Right. Okay. Devi?
Yeah, I think if I had come back after 2 years, I think I pretty much for one of those years I was not there anyway.
Yeah. I have to say, I was thinking of you a little bit too, thinking, what is it like to jump back in like that?
I'm happy that I was there for part of it at least. Now, the point is, I think the most important thing I would have missed is that I would have missed the opportunity to refine or to sharpen my creative juices. For example, I think I would have missed the opportunity to find solutions to an issue where one had to communicate in a different way and still get the message across, keep students interested without feeling alienated. And I think that the creative part of that thinking is what I would have missed sorely, saying for this 2 years, I did a job. I just went along the same path that I had from my home to my destination. I didn't investigate an alternative path. And if I had investigated an alternative path, I might have exercised my own mind some more in finding better solutions, which are of a completely different nature and would have made me more, refined, would have made me more intellectually competent. I think if I had missed that experience, I would have sorely felt that. And even going partly through that, I can see that this whole thing has regurgitated everything in the brain. The way you think, the way you create, the way you communicate. And I think if that would be critically what I would have missed. I think now I feel that there is a substantial amount of that fortunately having captured it, I think I've got some benefits from it.
Brilliant. Oh, that's very positive, very positive. Taher?
I agree with Devi, and in continuation to some of the points he raised, I largely look at this as a language that, or a tool of communication rather, because that's essentially what this is all about, what this new format or new way of teaching and learning is all about. So the more nuanced your skills in being able to communicate, whether it is through the use of these tools or through, just speech or a mixed bag of using.
I think we're losing him. He's gone into another district, District 9. Okay, well, we'll give Taher another. Oh, sorry, Taher, we missed part of what you're saying. Oh, he's gone now. We really know. Okay. I have a feeling, Keshava, you want to respond to that? Like, what would, it's reversed, right? You're a student. As painful as it may be, a question is saying, is there anything you feel you would have missed if this hadn't happened?
Like in terms of student perspective, I think I would have missed a lot of things, like how it was going to be in future. Like imagine this if it's happening like this for the whole, maybe the whole life or something like that. Like obviously online thing is going to be a part of a kind of an education in future too, starting from now. And when we see a lot of things like how technology is improving, making them more immersive in talks and making them more immersive in discussions, is what I think I would have missed. And also the technological advancement I have to improve towards. And maybe you could see how metaverse is coming right now, and it's bleeding into our lives. Like you could see the movie like Ready Player One. I think if you have noticed it, like it could happen something like that in our future. Maybe if it was happening right now, I would have missed that. Like the whole technology towards adapting to that technology. So. Right.
So, in a way, it's a little circular, saying, "Oh, it happened, and I'm glad I was part of it because it happened, and it's happening everywhere." But at the, and in future, maybe, there's project software, like when you're doing projects, where you can actually be on the site, make a change on your drawing, and it's immediately put through the entire system, and the BIM and the office changes, and the guy can be sitting in the office and go, oh, Keshava just made a change in the drawing, and because he's on site, right? So there's that kind of interaction which is already happening. Very, very few people get to use it because it's only the colossal countries like HOK, they have all that stuff, right? But the little office with 10 or 15 people in India probably won't have that stuff. But it's coming, right? It'll get cheaper and cheaper and easier and easier. So that's definitely part of it. And learning to work in that realm, I mean, probably helps a lot, yeah. Bharani, do you have anything to offer on that?
Nothing new, sir. It's
Nothing new? Okay. Anybody else? Vidu?
Yeah. I think more or less it got covered only. I was just trying to finding the analogy between a scene in Interstellar in which the hero comes back and see that, oh, her daughter, like his daughter has already grown so old and he's like still young. So I think coming back from a sabbatical would be something like that to us. Oh, people have like learned so much, and I think I'm still not there yet. So yeah, it would have like missed a lot on the things because we have adapted too much to the online ways and tools and new ways of, maybe some ways in which we are trying to fool the students, in some ways students are trying to fool us. Those kind of things are also there. Nobody talks about them. But there are new ways. We are evolving. So we would have missed a lot of that.
I think we'll see a lot. We'll learn a lot next month when we meet second year and third year students. And who are second year are coming to the school for the first time, right? They've never been in the university experience. So they're going to be freshers in second year.
Yeah.
And it's going to be really, then I think what you were just saying, then we'll actually know how old we are. When they show up, because that's when you meet. That's what relativity says, is you have to actually meet for relativity to work. So, anybody, I think everybody's had a chance.
I think I have a point to make. I appreciate Keshav's point on the metaverse and also the point you raised about how it's becoming a part of our life. I have a personal take, which is a little different in the sense that I am relatively suspicious of technology, in the sense that I think that it's an integral part of our lives. We are swept away with it. And I think all of our entire ambitions in the formal learning world, everything that we are taught about is all about how we should progress further and further on this mindless path of technology or material progress. Fundamentally, all of this technology is towards some sort of enhancement of quality of living in some ways and material progress in other ways. I think the blind acceptance of technology, and just because the whole world says economics is governing the whole of the universe, so to say, and the basis for that growth is deemed to be technology, and technology is being pursued so unscrupulously that I think people have forgotten that there's something called slow food and fast food, and that everybody is only going for the fast food. I mean, it's a very silly analogy, but I think that one has to stop and think sometimes, are we really needing to run so fast? Are we really needing to prove a point that we can keep on getting technologically better every day and become better people as a race? I have serious suspicions about that, because the only way I can see it is not very nice in my eyes. That the rate at which we are going and the rate at which technology is helping us develop ways of qualitatively better living is also helping us develop qualitatively incredibly bad ways of doing things. As you can see, the threats even in the planet today between nations are all fraught because of their own technological superiorities and their military flexing, So if you had the technology, you can actually push it and you can make it. So humanity is sort of getting fuzzed out in this whole process. So I think even the metaverse, by the way, which is being promoted by Facebook, which is one of the biggest players of the economic whole situation, if you call it that way, along with everyone else. I mean, I don't want to sound like some, activist with a placard standing there on the street saying, hey, down with technology, up with, idlis or something like that. No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying we should always stop to think before we do things. Maybe we can't guide the way the world thinks. Maybe we can't, but I think we can choose the way we want to think. And we can make a difference to our lives and to the lives of at least some people around us. So I think we have to be a little careful about how much we embrace it.
I agree with you, sir. I really agree with you, because one of the things which I have been continuously seeing over this technology is to control the people and to get them hooked into the situation and control them and get the data from them. And one thing is, information is created by humans, and it is certain information is there in the physical setting, and that information can only be transmitted from an individual to individual. Okay, that's how. But the way it is transferred is using a technology. Either you can talk one-on-one or you can use an email communication. But the information is generated by us or by observation. And how you transmit the information using the tools is a choice that you have to make. And I feel that it's just a business model. It's just at the end of the day, it is a business model. But at the end of the day, you have a choice whether you want to be a part of that system, and that's just a tool. That's just a tool. Yeah, yeah.
Well, if you were paying attention in the 90s, there was a lot of effort and a lot of big high-flying talk about this new society. And a lot of the things over the last, especially in the first decade of this, a decade ago, a lot of the things that were highly idealistic were nevertheless absorbed and co-opted by companies. So this whole thing about having to enter all your data to, over and over again, your address, your telephone number, blah, 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 your email, you have to enter that stuff over and over again, is something that was actually not envisioned originally. But it became something that was part of business, because businesses could get equity out of how many addresses they had in their hard drives. So it became, the whole thing's been taken over by business, but there's a view of it that is actually, the idealistic element is still somewhere hiding in the background. But there's rapacious, capitalistic, reductivist things where the so-called metaverse of Facebook is like the epitome of like this, going another step into turning us into just like matrix creatures parked in a little dock where we're just creating energy for the system and our value of our life is pointless. So okay, we've got another 15 minutes and I wanted to go to one more question, which is another speculative question, and I think that all of the talk we've done so far kind of builds up to this one. So let's take another scenario. Let's say we've got institutions like Vit-Vsparc, the IITs, SPA, institutions which have been teaching architecture for a long time, analog. And then you've got companies now that are going to come up, which are going to push very hard into the digital space, into the virtual teaching space. Now, in terms of thinking about, say, Vit-Vsparc, let's just focus on this school because it's in terms of its attributes, like there's 400 schools in India which have similar attributes, which are based on COA requirements and so on, right? So if you have a school which is going to have to directly kind of maintain its value in a space where some schools are going to create low quality, low fees using online means, they're going to create a low quality, low fees situation. Then you have something like SPA, which may not be able to move at all, or the IITs are going to be, what are they going to do, right? And so if Vit-Vsparc is kind of between those two, very traditional schools that have a long history and it's an analog history, and you have fast-moving digital players who are trying to reduce the fees for parents, and the parents are falling for it, what would you say is the main thing that we could do as an institution here to maintain or enhance value? And I think Debbie's already been using the word of a hybrid system or a blended system. But let's go a little deeper than that and say, well, what would be the key attributes of a blended system or a hybrid system? So we can start with Debbie and we can go through everybody one more time.
think the salient aspects would be that we kind of separate the coursework that we do. Let's see the objectives. Let's see the objectives of our course. I think the objectives of our course should be to promote thinking on humanitarian grounds and actually do the job of an architect, which is spatial design, which means that there is an incredible amount of personal thinking, that a lot of subjective ideologies which are fed into it, and there's a whole lot of sensorial perception built into it. So the broader outlook, that should be what we really want to be, spatial designers who can get things done. At the level of the operational aspects of the course, I would say we should have perhaps two sets of courseworks. One which is entirely, based on theory, which may not be, let us say, so contestable or subjective in its content. There could be mathematics, there could be structures, there could be certain kinds of subjects, maybe even on partly on, let's say, materials and things like that, or about other theoretical subjects. But there could be the other part, which is part of the blended system, where, let's say, if construction technology, you actually feel the materials you use, you actually sense the things around you, and you interact with people around you in real time to perceive how your design and creative inputs are actually being looked at by others or reacted to by others. I think we need to separate the so-called laboratory subjects, if you'll call it that way, or design subjects, and make them very physical. And the theory subjects can be just a free float. And I think the kind of advantages we can get by the resources we can get, the kind of people who can talk to us, just like we had an interior designer this morning talk on the subject of lighting. And it was so enlightening for all of us, in the sense that they've obviously been doing an interior design and, doing all this kind of research and projects. So it's far easier for people to communicate from all over the place. It would be ideal even for a laboratory studio to have it happen, but at least for the theory courses, I think we can have a substantial amount of online engagement so that people are in touch with technology at the same time, don't lose their sense of humanity and personal engagement and interaction.
Okay, good. Thank you. Taher, he's back, I think. Taher, are you
Yes,
available?
I'm back. I've been here. I apologize for the signal and the traffic in the background, but if you don't mind, I'm going to keep the camera off.
Did you catch the question we're on now?
I did.
Okay, good.
So I think this offers and presents a great opportunity to hit a reset button of sorts. And this reset goes back to a point you raised, Michael, about the profession or the industry or the business of education itself being in crisis. And the fact that we were in a non-negotiable back against the wall pandemic situation that we all had to adapt to overnight and come up with ways in which we would negotiate that. And like you said, some schools do this well, some schools are still grappling with this, and different institutions are going to have different ways in which they're going to negotiate this. And like you said, this is an excellent business opportunity, and a lot of people are going to cash in on it. That goes unsaid, but I agree to a great extent on the way in which the type of learning can be hybridized in the manner that Devi spoke about a little earlier. But largely, I think this is such a wonderful opportunity because we, in a sense, now can control or rather ask ourselves extremely important questions about not just the business of education, but also largely where our profession is headed, because whether we like it or not, we can't disconnect from the virtual component of it, not just through learning, but also through space creation. I mean, and I don't want to go back to the metaverse conversation. I think all of us have our own dystopian visions or something like that. But for me, this is a phenomenal opportunity that all of us are sitting on. And I think if I can speak on purely, say, from Vit-Vsparc's perspective, this allows us to redesign a system that takes the best out of the systems that we've seen both work and not work, and come up with something that we think can truly be optimized, be cost effective so that it's attractive to parents, it's attractive to students, and at the same time find a way to rethink the way we disperse information and the way we communicate. And the things that we need to fix are points that are raised earlier, such as, just the fatigue of staring at a flat screen. Bharani raised an interesting point where, on a personal level, she felt that she had evolved a lot more. And that goes back to the point of how, in a class of, say, 30, 40, 50, 100 people, all of us are very different. Some of us would respond greatly to, this large class.
Oops. I think we lost him again.
Sorry. Largely I was saying that all of us are so different in the way we react to spaces and we react to the classroom setup. So I do think there are very positive takeaways that a hybrid system can hope to address. So I'm personally very, very optimistic about this system.
Good. Thanks. Vidu, what would be your take on the way a school like Vit-Vsparc can move forward in a space between fully digital wannabes, let's say, and the analog space? Like what would be the key elements that you would think of as being needed or an opportunity for us?
Okay. I feel like for an architecture school particularly, like all the comments like have been given already, so I'm not giving anything new. It's like just summing it up. Lot of, I feel, architectural studios, a part of it can be like where we are in very initial stages when we are just talking about ideas or people are presenting their concepts. It can be in a digital mode, but then there are a lot of aspects which has to be like when you are discussing with your mentor or when you are presenting some of the ideas which are maybe in based through physical models, talking about materiality and textures. I think those can be, if they can be in more physical space, then I think it would be more profitable for the student as well as for the other people who, like, there could be peer learning involved in that case. So, and theory classes can be in digital mode or in physical mode. Like the concept of attendance can be like, I think it can be totally taken out from a learning in a degree college, because if a person is coming to the class, it should be like they shouldn't be imposed upon them. They should come here just for the sheer joy of learning. So I think these, like a hybrid mode in which we understand, okay, what are the critical junctures in which people have to be there physically present. I think it's very important, and it's important to analyze that kind of way. And I think that kind of thing could be go forward for a school like VIT or any school who has architecture as one of the focus areas of it. So I think a hybrid way is definitely a go, but we have to critically think like which parts have to be in physical and which part can.
I'm getting the point that this is a difficult subject, because so far all three people have said, yes, we have to do something, but to actually pick out those attributes that are needed and can be enhanced is truly a creative act. Like Tahir was saying, press the research button, because actually it seems almost that we'd have to invent new things that we haven't even seen yet, even over these 2.5 years. There's a huge scope for evolution here. And it's maybe too big a subject to talk about, but still it's worth asking, right? Because it helps us to focus what we would have to actually do and to figure out where those values are and how they kind of touch, how they can be manifested, basically. Sandeep?
Yes.
Next on the list.
Yeah. Well, some of the points which I want to discuss already have been presented by the other panel members. To answer the questions, like we have this conventional schools, and we will be having some schools which will be totally digital. And as a Vit-Vsparc where we have to stand, I want to address this question in light of pandemic. So I don't think the conventional schools can also go in a conventional way because we are in a pandemic situation. They will be forced to change to some kind of uh, to adapt to the digital mode. I mean, it is. I mean, it is inevitable. Like everyone has to because it is a common denominator pandemic, and so we have elite institutes in the world, and we have other institutes also, and the difference that the elite institutes like I mean top rank institutes or like mediocre institutes differ is the I mean kind of research or the faculty that they have and how the knowledge is being disseminated. um, so that I mean the pandemic does not affect the transfer of knowledge or having the faculty, right? An institute can have a I mean highly qualified faculty who can really teach wonderfully to the students, and the only means is through the online. I mean, however, having said that, uh, there are certain aspects to the profession of architecture which cannot be taught online. Like we have discussed about few examples. And if you want to do an experiment, it could not be possible. If you want to take a student to the site visit, it is not possible in the pandemic situation. I think there could be some ingenious solutions in the technology, as you were mentioning, Dr. Michael, that maybe to tackle some of the courses, we can come up with the ingenious solution. And I was just thinking, like I was pondering as the question was put forth, why not? How can we leverage metaverse, having avatars and just being online and teach? Like I mean, we don't get the feel of a site or this one. Maybe like if you really think there are some answers in technology which can address some of the constraints that we are having. You know what I mean? Like some technologically you
Yes.
can resolve, but it is not 100%. Where we had to stand is like where we draw the line in the adoption of technology. Should we go completely digital, or should we come up with some kind of I mean definitely hybrid mode, but what is the degree of digitization, what is the degree of physical, uh, it needs a greater deliberation, I guess. Yeah.
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 Yeah, it does.
Yes.
So next, Parani, do you have something to add to this question? If you were you're coming to a university and it was hybrid, what would be the main thing that you would want to have happen, for example?
I would, okay, the one thing that I was thinking of was the different types of media that we have all adapted and evolved. Like the students, they're all using different types of media to communicate our work right now. But if we were supposed to go, if we were going back to the purely physical and if there was no digital component, that would be really difficult because that would be some kind of a devolving situation. So I think the ready acceptance and also like experimentation with different types of media that should ideally be encouraged. And another point that I would like to make is it's something it falls on what Devi sir was saying earlier, to relook at objectives. And this also kind of connects to what Keshav was trying to drive with the metaverse conversation. It is inevitable. We and being engulfed by metaverse, it's gonna happen one day. But what we can do, what can resiliency look like for something like Vsparc is we can reevaluate the priorities and the principles and values, have something concrete to fall back onto, and like something that makes us feel like, okay, we are Vsparc, collective consensus or something. So that's the only way I think we can ride the technological wave, or because in the end, it's we need to adapt to it, and we can use technology to adapt to what we want to be achieving. So I think that's very important to start out. And right now, at like a very basic level, different types of media. That's what is happening with students, I think.
Okay, that's very good, very concise. Keshav?
Yes, sir. So, as per my opinion, when I feel regarding any like learning some design condition or design experimentation, I would feel very comfortable offline. Like I would communicate very well offline. Like maybe if I want to sketch, even if I have some technology, something like a stylus or like a paper, it is stylus could be happen easily, but I don't think so. People will be adapt to it and maybe make it more useful in communicating your ideas. Maybe when you are in offline, it's very easy to communicate through via your sketches on a paper, and even the professor could come and sketch on what you are drawing, and that is more interactive than what we see right now, what's happening right now. And I feel offline is a very good approach in learning, especially in architecture, where it comes in hands-on experience. And when we say theoretical, yes, we could do something like an online board, what is happening right now, but not like a pre-recorded sessions, I would say, because pre-recorded sessions would not enhance the learning of what professor wants to student to learn. Like I think when professor is teaching, he'll be explaining with his own experience what he learned, and with kind of a stories which we integrate towards, and that will be more interactive than a robotic pre-recorded session and or some tests which you have to pass through, whether maybe you could pass through via some 14 attempts or 15 attempts knowing the algorithm of the questions. I think so offline kind of approach is very positive towards what architectural education should be going towards.
Wow. Okay.
Can I add
Very
something to what Keshav
Sure.
was mentioning? I mean, I think it's important. When we are interacting with the students, even in the online, there is some interest created even for the faculty also. Like if a student comes up with a novel kind of questioning, that makes faculty think and helps explore. But I don't think it will happen in the recorded lecture and sent to the students. You can definitely communicate through email and all, but sometimes spontaneous questions. When one student is asking, it will actually create curiosity, or it will give him a platform for the other students to ask a similar question. So that actually helps the faculty to even investigate into the subject and teach them. I guess that's yeah.
So you're saying that in the online situation, the students will better know what the other students are asking and doing, and that will be propagated more quickly than if there's a private conversation at a desk somewhere.
Yeah. And also, like in case of a recorded lecture, I record a lecture and give it to the students, and he might ask one question. But if it is an online class like this, what we are having, if Keshav has asked, maybe based on his thought, Bharani could ask another question, and it will create interest for the faculty to even investigate further and answer them. Yeah.
Thank you. I had one aspect which popped into my mind recently, so I'm actually taking the opportunity to answer the question I was asking. When I first came to the school before the lockdown, Professor Devi and I I offered to him or suggested to him that I have the opportunity to do design build studios where at two locations where we're actually going to build something, where the students would come for 1 semester or 2 semesters and actually hands-on construct something in 2 different locations I have available, which closed down due to the pandemic. That didn't happen. But the big problem I had with it was that if the students come for a whole semester, what happens to their other classes? Like, how can they do, right? They would have to bring along the other faculties up into the Himalayas. We'd have to bring 2 or 3 faculties along, and of course they'd be very inefficient because either they'd be teaching only one class or they'd have to be able to teach 3 very different things to one group. I mean, it just doesn't work. But in an online context, what about reversing the whole thing? That the students go off into a design build scenario somewhere in India, and those kind of technical classes that they need, they can do online from that location. So they spend the day out there lifting rocks and building things and designing at the specific location, and then they can interface once or twice a week with a professor who's at their home school, and they can be gone for 2 whole semesters, then do a project over 2 semesters and get all of their other things lined up online, as we have been doing for 2 years. 2.5 years ago, this would have been an unthinkable concept because we would have said, oh, come on, you can't just have a whole, but now it's actually almost like, where's the problem, right? It would almost be simple. To me, that's a huge change over the past 2.5 years. This would not have been a concept that you could fly the flag, right? But everybody would have said, no, you can't do, right? But we're all prepared for that now. So that's what I think. There could be schools which go where the studio teaching is on site wherever they are. They move around the country, and the central location supplies online content or online classes as necessary. And so these students are working like this, and they're doing what Devi was talking about, where they're feeling the place. We're not just in school feeling the place, we're actually literally in places feeling the place. So you could actually flip the whole school around and turn it into an inside out kind of situation where the studios are and of course that would take resources that we don't have, but at the same time, after a time, it would become entrenched. And these studio places, like I know lots of schools in the States, like my school, Oregon, they have a studio in Portland. So the students can go study in the city for a semester and experience the city particularly. But and then there's the Rome studio, right? You go to Rome or something for the summer. So all those things have always been happening, but now there's this weird thing where it's accepted to get online teaching. And with that acceptance, viability comes on a whole other scale. Well, that's one thing I was thinking, okay, now we're going to the closing comments. We have 12:08. And so I guess everybody should get a chance to summarize. And the only thing I would say is if you can speak to the idea that if architecture needs to be, architectural education, the profession needs to move forward and solve problems and evolve in a positive way. Like if you could summarize in light of this positive movement forward. So can I start with you, Keshava? Start and we'll go all the way up go up the list to Debbie.
Yes, sir, yes, sir. So I feel architecture, when we are seeing in future in terms of education, like I think the hybridization of involving with both online and offline would be a great aspect to look towards, like how it involves with dealing with many people around the world and taking different opinions. Like we could see all the positives on the online educations. Like you could take out the negatives and maybe use the only positives when towards the future in kinds of education we are looking towards, will add a more enhanced ability to learn architecture.
Okay, thank you. Very nice, good summary. Parani?
Yeah, so before this talk, Keshav and I had done a small Google Forms, which we circulated to our whole batch. And we have a few, the questions we asked were, it was obviously not in light of the issues that we just discussed, but there were two questions that I would like to talk about what the student consensus was. So one was about how we have all these different options, different ways to express our work, communicate our ideas right now through online. So has that made has it made communication easier for you as a student? And most of them said yes, it has made it easier. And the other one was about how with every semester, everything that we do for a class or a studio is well documented. We have everything, even from the recordings to, if I draw on a piece of paper, because I have to put it in a presentation later, I will take a screenshot, I will scan it and put it in a folder, right? So do they find themselves going back and looking at their previous work more often than they used to when we had physical studios? And they said yes. So I think that is an opportunity. Like these two things can be looked at as things that can be encouraged going forward. And it's also like
that's wonderful. Wonderful. Yeah. Actually, that is two concrete points that we can actually latch onto, right? That would say yes, the students feel that the communication is better, despite everything that we've talked about just now, where we're feeling distance and the cameras are off and so on. And I can see how that is. I mean, I have been in live studios, and I can see that there's a lot of students who would find a way to penetrate into a sense of being central to the studio, where in a studio situation where all the people are milling around, they would have a harder time feeling that anything particular happened. So that's really good. That's really good. And that's nice. Can we go to Sandeep?
Yes,
Closing
that's
statement.
fine. Yeah, I just wanted to separate two things here. One is a knowledge, transmission of a knowledge from a faculty, knowledge of architecture, transmission from a faculty to a student. Now that knowledge could be disseminated in a uh, in a conventional way. You are in a physical setting, and you are in the classes, and you are learning. You are doing hands-on project in the studio and all. Now the pandemic has come, and it made us we are social, physically separated. In this we are using technology. So however, we after much of discussion and analysis, we found out that technology could solve certain things, and it could enhance the teaching, but it cannot also solve. I think we have to take a shot at how we can leverage the technology to enhance our hybrid mode of teaching, at the same time not neglecting the conventional way. Like whenever coming up with the means to have a conventional way of teaching. So we are striking a balance between a technology that is online and a conventional way which is offline. So that's my summary. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. Nice. Vitu.
Yeah. For me, I'll summarize by 3 points. First, to understand what is the line architectural, and for meeting its spontaneity in classes, spontaneity.
Okay.
One to that, whether we are on.
Vidu.
Yeah.
Vidu.
Can you hear me?
No, we've been having a hard time. Do you want
can
to
you
let,
hear me? Can you hear me?
We're having a hard time. So why don't we let Taher go first and you try again, because your bandwidth has been good for a while.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
we'll please repeat that after Taher. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks. Taher.
Hi. So I think largely a lot of the points that were already mentioned. And firstly, I really appreciate Bharani and Kesha for setting up a form, getting students' feedback, and it was a very pleasant surprise, if I can say that, to hear from students that they feel more connected and better engaged with their faculty. And this goes back to an important point, whether it's physical space or virtual space. You can be present, but you can also be absent, in the same space. So the same logic applies to the physical setting of a classroom or the virtual setting of, a virtual studio. And I'm only going to address one point, which is the highly debated discussion of teaching design or discussing design or engaging with design. I think one of the very, very promising things that the virtual environment does is, in a sense, keeps you within a contained environment virtually. Of course, physically, you could be doing whatever. I'm standing in the middle of the road right now, for instance, but I'm very much involved in this discussion. But most importantly, I think the fact that we're always encouraged to be part of the conversation when other people are discussing their design, so that we learn from others through discussions and dialogues between other groups of presenters and other groups of people that are working. So I feel like that is by far one of the most healthy things that I observed in the designs, the highly debated design studio, as far as the architectural curriculum is concerned. That, in a sense, that forced captivity, if you will, was indirectly a very, very good thing, because I could see that a lot of students, many of them stuck around to be part of discussions that didn't really involve their design. And I'm pretty sure there are takeaways that you can't really quantify, but and I think that's important. And I feel like if there is one positive from this virtual environment with regards to the design studio, this would be it.
Very good, very good. I also think Taher wins the award for most cool participant by being in 3 completely different modes of physical space during the thing, and maintaining the same kind of line of thought even as you're going through these different spaces. That's very, very inspiring to see, very cool. Thanks a lot. Vidhu?
Yeah. Am I audible now?
Yes, it's very good now.
Okay. So I'll sum it up in 3 points. First, I think spontaneity, that is like very much essential for architecture education, be it in offline or online mode. That is something which we have to maintain in our classes, in our group discussion, and as well as our one-to-one discussions. Second is to be, to understand, to be empathetic towards the learner, and of course, expecting the same empathy from the learners towards the teacher. And third point is the stress which is involved with any kind of education system, but it is much more when we are in the online process. And I think stress of the students has always been talked about, but I think as tutors we face a lot more stress, and nobody talks about that. So that is something which has to be accounted when we are talking about hybrid systems. So I think these 3 points can be it can be pondered more, and I think I'll just sum it up with this.
That was good. The stress we didn't actually even talk about during the whole time, so it's a new point, and I'm glad you added it because it's at least registered in this in the record of this event here.
I would just like to respond to that. I know that teachers, I mean professors, we're professors here, so they not appreciate it. I mean, we don't even celebrate Teachers' Day. It's not a big deal here. But I would like to, personally appreciate everyone because you guys have appreciated the students multiple times for adapting to the online mode. But it's obviously more difficult for all the professors, I would think. So yeah, it's God knows I'm thankful.
Thanks, Varney.
Thank you.
This one was much needed.
That's very nice. That's very nice of you. So we've got one person left to make the final comments, and that's Devi.
Yes, I think I'd like to just talk about this from let's say the point of view of management of education, of architectural education. Recently, there was news that deemed universities can actually offer full online courses like degrees, and these will be not equivalent but equal to physical courses. So this is the proposal of the Ministry of Education that this should be done in this manner. I think when they make these sweeping policies on education, I think there has to be some sort of moderation in the thought process to understand what are the kinds of courses they are looking at and what are the kind of things that they think should be part of such a completely online engagement. Because as we have all more or less agreed upon, we all, I think, are of the similar view that a blended kind of system where some hands-on education is there and some online or facilitated by digital technologies, some sort of learning is possible. I think we see that as the way forward, as by some sort, maybe because of this whole pandemic, it has thrown us into such kind of creative opportunities like what Professor Michael said, sitting somewhere in a place, fortunately, which has some internet connection, but you're building a rural outreach area, some buildings there, and you're having your classes there too. I think it'll be outstanding, and the experience could be exhilarating from all points of view, right? From a completely personality development, and the way people, the students themselves look at their environments would be incredibly enhanced. As an offshoot of that, I could also see that, you may not be able to do this for all the semesters of a program because you can't be sitting in a village all the time and you can't be building multi-storied buildings, I guess. So maybe there are times when you have to be in the studio. So there could be an opportunity where maybe you bunch up the theory subjects and put them together so that the students come and maybe talk, speak, breathe, eat, design for 3 months of the semester. And maybe for a month and a half or 2, they just do theory. So they can actually have theory classes and this segregated, but over a limited time span. Because if you start segregating it too much, then they will all be compartmentalized. So if there are opportunities, it's just a process of thought. Maybe it has its disadvantages, but you could think of bunching. Maybe whole mornings can be completely theory and only one section for design, lab, etc. So these are all little logistical things which we can sort out. But I think we do recognize that there are a lot of opportunities to leverage both the digital and the physical. And as both Keshav and Bharani have also, sort of summarized, it's like they can see the benefits and the manner in which we can take it forward from the student perspective and also from the faculty perspective. So I think what we need to really focus on here as a summation is the integrity of the process. If we have a certain objective for the educational process, we must ensure its integrity. It's like the students must have the integrity to want to learn and want to become better at their job. And the faculty must have that equal dedication. I think if that did integrity and it's not just about exams per se, although it's an important part of the whole assessment process and all that, and it's a part of the nitty-gritty process. But I think we all need integrity to make these things happen. So I think that's at the backbone of this structure of a whole blended system being a success.
Great. Wonderful. That, in a certain way, that's a great place to stop, to finish. Although I hear Sandeep is bursting to have one more say.
But not exactly. Just to add a point, it's always if we create a system, I guess there should be a feedback loop, and getting the feedback loop and working on ironing out the creases and making the system more robust. So that is also a part of it. And well, definitely,
it would be enhanced by being online. We have so many vehicles for feedbacking, even as Bharani and Keshav developed a small little feedback impulse just on the spur of the moment for this thing. I mean, it can be fast. I do have situations where students are voting on feedback using multiple devices so they can vote 3 times, which is even on simple feedback questions, but that's another question, right? That's another issue. I think that we've reached the end of this discussion, and I think we managed to make a very rounded kind of traversing. We traversed the whole issue quite nicely in a very rounded way, where you were all able to one by one bring in so many interesting points. And this thing could suffice as a value adding creative document of what online teaching could be. And it goes far beyond just talking about quality of education and starts to, as Taher said, press the research button. And that's what I would hope for. The outcome for this is that we really press the research button, and that not a 5-year cycle, but within 2 years, you would have to start integrating this stuff. As I didn't know about what Professor Devi was saying, that there's actually a government idea about going fully online in some kind of institutional way. Holy cow, I would say that's quite something. I mean, that's fast, right? And the pressure is going to be there. Not saying that you should feel stress about it, right? We can all be very relaxed. So I think I would like to thank you all as the moderator. I would like to thank you all for being here and being so engaged. It was tremendous. I think it's just a big success, this panel.
I personally want to thank for your thought-provoking questions, because I think Robert, he says, that's a wrong question. You had to ask the right question. This holographic thing is there. So, I mean, wonderful viewpoints. I want to thank all the panelists and moderator and Ankit and our director, Dr. Madhumati, for facilitating this. Definitely, and the students too, Keshav and Bharani, for giving their perspective. I mean, I learned a lot. There are a lot. It's a complex dimension. It has a complex dimension which needs looking from a different perspectives.
Yeah. We can all watch the YouTube video again, the YouTube recording. Taher, you wanted to say something? Taher? No, it's gone now.
Not really, Michael. I think.
Oops, you're offline. I mean, your mic's off.
No, I was saying not really.
Okay, good.
I think it was covered. Yeah.
All right. So I guess we can close this meeting then, and thank you all, and we can all go to our lunch, and I'll see you guys later. So thank you.
Yes.
Bye.
Sir, hello.
Yes.
So I'm Kajal. I had anything to say.
Okay, yes,
Can
please.
I?
I'm sorry. I forgot to talk about the Q&A. I missed that. We were going to schedule a Q&A, so please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, sir. So I was actually going to speak that physical education is very much related to discipline, and it also helps us to learn new skills. Even if it is theory subjects, each student should be given that option, because I personally prefer physical classes and in times according to situation also online. Like I attended my last school years online and my coachings online. I barely remember things. Online education does have psychological effects that reduces concentration and uh, the absorbing ability or to some topics, whatever is being taught. But I also understand the perks of online interaction and classes. That you, like you mentioned, studio teaching on site, easy communication on different social media platforms. I really like the idea of students going on site with online teaching with their professors. But at last, I would like to sum up with my point of giving an option, even if it is in theory class. Also, my major concern here is for health of everyone. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes, that's important. And as we know, the technology sometimes is not organized around well-being. We have that a very big problem on all fronts in terms of food, processed food, processed architecture or non-architecture. It's not even architecture, and so many other levels. And education could end up being the same, could end up being a very unhealthy cocktail if it's all online or too much online, or online in the wrong way, where you're still getting grades, you're still getting graduates, but you're getting unhealthy people.
Yeah,
so
online in the wrong way actually is a good point. It's like running on the conventional system and still imposing the online method on it. That's quite a mismatch.
Anybody else have something to add from the audience, if you will, from the other participants who were not on the panel? Anybody else? Okay. Deepika, you want to do the honors?
Yeah, thank you, Michael. It was a wonderful discussion, and as everybody said, there are the pros and cons for each of the systems, and we are trying to adapt something that's hybrid that takes the pros from both worlds. So it was a wonderful discussion by all the panelists. They had their perspectives and they were well put forth. That is easily traversed towards the students here as well, and everybody else in the audience. So I want to thank each and every one of the panel members and also Dr. Michael for organizing the thoughts well throughout the session. I would now request Professor Ankit for a formal vote of thanks.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you all for making today's event successful. Firstly, I'd like to thank my sincere thanks to Vellore Institute of Technology and our director, Dr. Madhumati, for their support and permissions to conduct such events. I would like to thank Dr. Pallavi for her wonderful lecture on psychology of space, color, and its impact. Now, thank you all, the panel members, for sharing their views, insight on online education in architecture, the current scenario which we are going through. Thank you, Architect Tahir Zoya, for your time. Thank you, Professor Dev Prasad Sir, Dr. Sandeep, Professor Vidhu, and thank you, students, for your insight, Google form, research, and presenting the student feedback on the matter. In the last but not at the least, thank you, Dr. Michael, for moderating the panel discussion. Best wishes to all. I hope we all can engage in such kind of events and online discussion more often.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you for a wonderful morning, all of you. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.